Perry March was born in 1961 to Arthur March and Tziporah. He and his wife, Janet, were complete opposites of each other. He is ordinary, but his wife was a very bright, beautiful woman, dreamy and talented. Janet grew up in a wealthy family, as the daughter of a well-known lawyer from Nashville. Janet and Perry met as students at the University of Michigan in the early 1980s and quickly became inseparable. When Perry graduated and moved to Chicago to work as a financial broker, Janet followed him without hesitation. However, she soon began to miss her home and family. To support Perry's education, her father agreed to pay for his expensive tuition at the prestigious Vanderbilt Law School. As a result, Janet and Perry returned to Nashville, and since Perry was hesitant, it was Janet who proposed to him in Percy Warner Park. They got married in 1987 and moved into a house in a well-known area of the city, which was rented and paid for by Janet's father. The following year, Perry graduated and chose to work for a local law firm in Nashville instead of accepting offers from large firms in New York. In 1990, Janet gave birth to a son named Samson, affectionately called Sammy. On the surface, this family seemed to have everything: a mother, a father, and a son. Unfortunately, this outward appearance of happiness was deceptive. In 1991, a scandal emerged at the law firm where Perry worked after a young female specialist received an inappropriate proposal from a colleague. A stranger sent her a letter expressing his attraction to her and his desire for an intimate relationship. Feeling embarrassed, the young woman reported the incident to her boss. After this, 2 more letters arrived, urging her to respond to the proposal by leaving a message in the firm's library. In response, the firm took measures to identify the sender of these inappropriate letters. They installed a CCTV camera in the library where she was supposed to leave her reply. When the man came to collect the letter, the firm's lawyers were shocked to discover that he was Perry March, the husband of Janet. Faced with evidence from the video, Perry refused to confess. The law firm gave him an ultimatum: resign or be fired. He chose to resign. This uncomfortable situation led to legal consequences, as the female employee who received the unwanted proposal sued Perry for financial compensation. He was ordered to pay her. To avoid a harassment claim, she requested $25,000, half of which Perry was to pay in monthly installments, while the remaining $12,500 was to be paid in a lump sum. This arrangement was made to keep his wife, Janet, from discovering the scandal. In 1994, Janet and Perry welcomed their second child, a lovely daughter named Tziporah. As their family grew, they decided to build a larger home and purchased nearly 2 acres in the affluent suburb of Forest Hill. Over the next year, they worked on constructing their dream house, a $650,000 mansion designed in the French country style. Janet was very enthusiastic about the project and closely oversaw every stage of the construction. However, her demands were sometimes unreasonable, leading Perry to step in and help mediate between her and the construction team. Although the new house brought excitement, Janet and Perry's marriage was facing difficulties. Their relationship had been strained for several months, and they frequently attended therapy, both together and individually. At home, they rarely communicated. Perry was often away for at least 3 days a week, and their arguments escalated whenever he returned. A family therapist suggested they take a break from each other, but Janet was adamant about getting a divorce. In August 1996, a significant incident occurred that changed the course of Janet and Perry's relationship forever. Perry needed to pay the final installment to a woman at a law firm, but, due to financial issues, he sent her a letter requesting to postpone the payment until October. Unfortunately, Janet read the letter, which led to a heated argument between them. In the aftermath, Janet contacted her mother to arrange a meeting with a divorce lawyer. On August 15, 1996, Janet was scheduled to meet with the lawyer but never arrived at the office because she mysteriously disappeared that night. Perry claimed that Janet left voluntarily after their argument. He told the police that she expressed a desire to get some space to think but did not specify where she was going. He said that at around 8:30 p.m., Janet packed a suitcase, took her passport and $1,500 in cash, and left in her car. He also mentioned that she left him a list of tasks to complete before her return. After she left, he informed friends and family of her departure as he normally would. The next morning, Deneen Beard, the maid, came to clean the house and was surprised to find everything in order. However, Perry asked her to focus on her work and not to go into the children's room. Then a nanny named Ella Goldschmidt, who had previously arranged with Janet that her son would play with Sammy, arrived. After Deneen left, Ella noticed Sammy jumping on an oriental rug that was rolled up on the floor next to the playroom. When she returned around 2 p.m. to pick up her son, the rug was no longer there. Initially, Janet's family believed Perry's explanation. Janet's father went to Nashville International Airport to check if Janet had left her car there. Janet's mother, Carolyn, became increasingly worried, as her daughter would not just vanish without a word and would never abandon her children. Although Carolyn wanted to contact the police, Perry convinced her to wait 12 days, claiming that Janet had said she would return by then. That evening, Perry called his father, Arthur, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel living in Jalisco, Mexico. Arthur readily agreed to travel to Nashville to support his son during this challenging time. In the meantime, Janet's family's concerns continued to escalate. With August 25th being Sammy's 6th birthday, fears grew that something had happened to Janet. She would definitely not miss such an important occasion. While Perry and Janet's parents told the party guests she had traveled to California to visit her brother and was postponing her return due to an ear infection, her sudden disappearance raised alarm among her loved ones. Days passed without any news from Janet, and the anxious waiting could not go on much longer. On August 29th, Janet's parents reported her missing to the police. Detective David Miller, a skilled investigator with extensive experience, was assigned to the case. He initiated the investigation by reaching out to hospitals and reviewing Janet's bank and credit card accounts, which had not been used since her disappearance, raising concerns about her well-being. On September 7th, authorities located Janet's car in a parking lot at an apartment complex about 5 miles from her home. The car appeared to have been parked there for several weeks. Inside, police discovered Janet's bag, which contained her documents, passport, credit cards, and $11 in cash. They also found a suitcase filled with clothes, notably absent of a bra, toothpaste, a comb, or underwear, which seemed unusual. Additional evidence included a pair of white sandals in the glove compartment and unusual, dirty bicycle tire tracks near the car. Investigators needed to analyze this evidence carefully. On September 10, 1996, Perry was questioned by investigators and consented to a search of his home. The police conducted the search over the weekend of September 14th to 15th while Perry was away in Chicago with his children. The house showed no signs of domestic violence or anything noteworthy. A few days later, the owner of a tire store contacted law enforcement to inform them that Perry had visited the store on August 21st, a week after Janet went missing. Perry inquired about purchasing a new set of tires, despite the good condition of those already on his car. When asked why he wanted a different brand, his response raised further suspicions. On September 18th, Perry decided to move to Chicago with his children. Before leaving, he had a concerning conversation with Janet's longtime friend, Diane Sachs, which she later reported to the police. Perry asked Diane if she thought he could kill his wife. Although she hesitated to answer, he proceeded to ask the disturbing question of what she would think if he had loaded Janet's body into his car and taken it to a remote location for disposal. This raised serious suspicions about him. As a result, the police launched a comprehensive search for Janet, involving divers, 2 helicopters with thermal scanners, specially trained dogs, police officers, and volunteers. Meanwhile, Perry hired a lawyer, who informed the police that Perry would not cooperate with the investigation. In November, as Janet's parents held a day of mourning for her, Perry chose not to attend, further increasing the police's suspicions about him. Over time, a theory about Janet's disappearance began to develop. It was suggested that Perry and Janet had a heated argument the night she disappeared. During this argument, Janet may have said something that provoked Perry, leading him to strike her hard. Given that Perry held a black belt in martial arts, a single blow could have killed her, or he might have strangled her. Whether intentional or not, when he found Janet dead at his feet, he was faced with a dire decision. Investigators believe that Perry hid Janet's body either in the basement, in the woods, or near their home. Furthermore, Ella had mentioned that there was a rolled-up rug that she had noticed in Perry's house that morning. Janet's body may have been inside that carpet, and tragically, little Sammy may have unknowingly played around his mother's body. Afterward, Perry moved her body to his Jeep and drove to a location where he buried it. He then drove Janet's car to where it was later discovered, taking her mountain bike with him so he could ride it back home. However, these are merely speculations, and the police were tasked with uncovering evidence of the murder, marking a new phase in the investigation. Janet's father, a prominent lawyer, was determined to uncover the truth about his daughter's disappearance. Meanwhile, Perry applied to become the manager of Janet's estate, but her parents opposed this and filed their own petition. Perry refused to consent. Ultimately, the court designated a guardian to oversee Janet's property and ordered Perry to return some items he had taken. He only returned them after being urged to do so. This was just the beginning of a legal dispute between Perry and Janet's parents. The battle continued until late 1999 when the court granted Janet's parents the right to visit their grandchildren. They traveled to Perry's new home in Illinois, eager to see the children, but were shocked to discover that he had moved to Mexico to be with his father. Moreover, just weeks after relocating, Perry married a local woman named Carmen Rojas. 3 years had passed since Janet went missing, and she still had not been officially declared dead. This prompted her parents to file a lawsuit against Perry for the manslaughter of their daughter. When Perry did not appear in court to contest the charges against him, the judge ordered him to pay $113.5 million in compensation to Janet's parents in May 2000. Janet's parents traveled back to Mexico to confront Perry and requested to meet his children. He firmly refused their request, prompting them to return to Nashville. A month later, they returned to Mexico with a court order and assistance from local police, who arrested Perry for violating his visa. Although the charges were eventually dropped, by the time Perry got back home, his children were missing. Taking advantage of Perry's absence, Janet's parents took the children to the U.S. and sought permanent custody once they were home. This led to a direct confrontation and sparked another legal battle for custody. Ultimately, Perry regained custody, and Janet's parents were reprimanded for unlawfully taking the children. Later, the Tennessee Court of Appeals overturned Perry's manslaughter conviction. At this point, Perry believed he could lead a stable life in Mexico with his new wife and children, feeling confident that nothing would disrupt his plans. However, unexpected developments were on the horizon, as the local police department, along with 2 investigators, continued to actively investigate Janet's case. In the latter half of 2004, the prosecutor's office introduced new evidence that led to a retrial, during which 59 witnesses were heard. This resulted in charges against Perry for second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. In October 2005, an arrest warrant and a request for extradition to the United States were issued for Perry. While being transported, Perry was accompanied by Pat Postiglione, one of the detectives involved in the investigation. During the journey, Perry was quite talkative and asked the detective whether he could face murder charges if an accident occurred. He also told Pat that he would be willing to confess everything if he could receive a sentence of no more than 7 years. The detective stated that he would pass this information on to the district attorney. Janet's parents were determined not to allow Perry to enjoy a new life after spending a short time in prison. They submitted a new petition for custody of the children, which the judge approved. Facing difficulties in the legal system, Perry sought another solution. He attempted to persuade his cellmate, Russell Ferris, to kill Janet's parents. Russell became interested in the plan and learned that Perry's father, Arthur, would act as the intermediary. After 2 months of discussions among the three, Russell's lawyer notified the police about Perry's offer to kill Janet's parents. From that point on, Perry's situation became increasingly complicated. Initially, the evidence against Perry for murder was weak and mostly circumstantial. His lawyer argued that there was no solid proof that Perry had committed the crime. If he had been found not guilty, he could not be tried again for the same offense. However, the situation changed dramatically with the discovery of a murder-for-hire plot involving Janet's parents. Now, the police had recorded conversations revealing details of the planned murder, including statements made by both Perry and his father, Arthur. When Arthur listened to the recordings, he realized his errors and agreed to testify against his son in exchange for a more lenient sentence. The disturbing truth emerged. Arthur, Perry's father, revealed that his son had confessed to him about killing Janet. A few weeks after the murder, Perry sought his father's help because he was anxious about the body being discovered. He asked Arthur to help hide it. One night, they drove to a location where, according to Arthur, the body was already decomposing and stored in a bag. Arthur recounted loading the remains into Perry's Jeep. They then traveled north to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where they stayed at a motel. Under the cover of darkness, Arthur attempted to dispose of the body. He looked for a body of water deep enough to conceal the remains but was unable to find one before sunrise. Eventually, he located a suitable spot. Arthur later attempted to guide investigators to the location where he had hidden the body, but he couldn't specify the exact spot. However, both the police and the jury believed his account of the incident. According to Arthur, after Perry killed Janet, her body remained in their home for some time, wrapped in a rug. Unfortunately for Arthur, his confession did not yield the leniency he had hoped for, and he died just months later while incarcerated. Perry faced a much harsher fate. He was convicted of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder, resulting in a 56-year prison sentence. He is currently incarcerated at the Morgan County Correctional Complex, where he assists fellow inmates with their legal appeals in the prison law library. He will be eligible for parole in 2038. Tragically, Janet's remains have never been found. Joanna Simpson was born in 1964. Her wealthy family lived in York, Yorkshire, UK, where she spent most of her childhood. Joanna attended an all-girls primary school and completed several grades before her family decided to move. The Simpsons relocated to Laxey on the Isle of Man after her father sold his construction company. After finishing local school, Joanna went to Oxford High School and then pursued business studies at Bath University. She was quite popular among her peers, was known as a well-mannered, kind, and optimistic girl. She willingly supported everyone she communicated with, which attracted people to her. Fellow students always crowded around her, eager to spend time together. Naturally, there were always young people in this group who were looking for her attention. Despite this, Joanna was more focused on her work and career. She wanted to establish herself before starting a family. She decided to get married in 1994 when she turned 30. Her husband also came from a wealthy family. Together, they bought a large house in Ascot, which was in a derelict state and required significant repairs. At that time, they did not have children, so the choice of such a large house seemed excessive to some. They lived there alone, not far from Windsor, where the royal family's castle was located. Additionally, Legoland was nearby, making this location appear to be a great option for expanding the family. However, Joanna was in no hurry to do so. She planned to convert part of the house into a guest house so that relatives and friends could visit often. Her husband supported her aspirations, but perhaps he wanted to have children. After 3 years of marriage, her husband decided to end their relationship. It seemed that this decision stemmed from his disappointment over not having children. Joanna was shocked by this decision. Her friends noticed how depressed she had become and wanted to help her. One of her close friends was a senior flight attendant and had a flight planned to South Africa. She invited Joanna to accompany her, hoping that a change of scenery would help Joanna regain her spirits. Joanna agreed. As it turned out, this decision was fateful. During the flight, she met a man named Robert Brown, who was the pilot of the British Airways airline on which she was traveling. Robert was an avid runner. He had been a British cross-country champion 3 times, which he was very proud of. It seemed they had a lot in common, and an affair began. Joanna retained ownership of the house after her first marriage, as she had invested most of the money into it. She and her new lover moved in together in September 1998. they began to think about marriage. By Christmas, Robert proposed. When everything happened so quickly, Joanna was usually more cautious, but not this time. After getting engaged, they married in February 1999. This rush surprised many, including Joanna's parents, who had only seen Robert a few times by that point. They did not have a good impression of him, believing he was too arrogant and unable to offer their daughter the love she deserved. However, it was futile to dissuade Joanna. She was independent and old enough to make her own decisions. The only thing her parents could do was encourage her to draft a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. The Simpsons believed this relationship might end quickly and did not want their daughter to worry about a potential divorce or risk losing part of her property. The newlyweds did not want to attract too much attention or organize an overly lavish ceremony. Afterward, they immediately traveled to South Africa, the country where they had first met. Joanna hoped to have an unforgettable honeymoon, but within the first few days of the trip, she began to doubt the soundness of her choice. Robert treated the hotel staff with such arrogance that Joanna felt uncomfortable. She had never witnessed her partner behaving so rudely before. After returning from her honeymoon, Joanna called her mother to express her worries. She admitted she was questioning her decision to marry Robert, realizing she didn't know him well enough. She was disturbed by his behavior during the honeymoon and feared his rudeness might eventually be directed at her. Although she began to see her marriage as a mistake, Joanna didn't end the relationship right away after returning from South Africa. She still hoped she could change him. This decision was likely influenced by the pregnancy she discovered after the trip. Like many women, she believed that having a baby would encourage Robert to become more attentive and caring as a father. However, Robert's actions seemed to indicate otherwise, undermining her hopes. Instead of becoming more considerate when he learned that his wife was pregnant, he grew even ruder and more disrespectful. This negative behavior also affected her relatives and friends. Joanna, however, did not want a divorce because she feared that their child would grow up without a father, which she thought would be a major problem. When their first son, Alex, was born, things changed only slightly. A few months later, Joanna became pregnant again and gave birth to their daughter, Katie, but this second child did not improve Robert's behavior. Although he did not physically harm Joanna, which may have prevented a breakup, their family and friends could see how much he was psychologically hurting her. Robert was toxic and rude to Joanna's family, friends, which caused her a lot of distress. Over time, their differences became more apparent. It was clear they should not have been together. Joanna recognized this, but their children made it difficult for them to separate. After the birth of her first child, she often said their marriage would not last and that divorce was unavoidable. She tried to endure the situation for 8 years, but eventually realized she couldn't continue like this. Her final decision came after her husband revealed his disturbing thoughts, including violent fantasies about harming her and their children. He contemplating end one's own life by crashing a plane. Feeling terrified, Joanna filed for divorce in 2007. From that moment on, Robert's behavior worsened significantly. He began to openly express his strong dislike for Joanna's loved ones and even for Joanna herself. He started to manipulate her by hinting at the possibility of end one's own life. When that tactic failed, he began making indirect threats about harming Joanna and their children. Joanna was uncertain about whether to take his words seriously or see them as mere manipulation. She suspected that Robert was fabricating these threats to pressure her into withdrawing her divorce application. He told his friends that he didn't want to distance himself from the children. However, due to his job, which required him to travel frequently, he often spent weeks abroad, leaving little opportunity for him to connect with them. Despite his negative feelings about the separation, Robert never changed his behavior in a way that would make Joanna reconsider her decision to divorce. After Joanna filed for divorce, they continued to live together for a few months. An incident later made Joanna realize that her decision was justified. One evening, while they were putting their children to bed, a conflict erupted. Robert falsely accused Joanna of cheating, a claim he regularly made without any evidence. Joanna, who was fully committed to caring for their children, had no time for an affair. She attempted to defend herself, but her efforts seemed in vain. The argument escalated in the kitchen, and at one point, Robert grabbed a knife, confronted her. He even pressed the blade against her throat, threatening to harm her. Despite the serious situation, Joanna remained composed. She explained that any desire to harm her was illogical because her husband knew she was a good mother. Killing her would leave their children without either parent. Joanna pointed out that if Robert acted violently, he would likely face imprisonment. Eventually, she persuaded him to put down the knife. The following day, Joanna shared the incident with her mother and some friends. They all agreed she should report it to the police because it was a serious matter. They observed that Robert's behavior had become erratic and dangerous since she filed for divorce. Joanna was worried that if she reported her husband, it would negatively affect their children, so she wanted to avoid putting them under that stress. She thought the situation would improve on its own. After his aggressive outburst, she spoke to him again and made it clear that their relationship could not be repaired. He accepted this reality. Now, Joanna insisted that Robert move out of her house because she felt that living together could be unsafe for everyone. However, he refused to leave, saying he would not change his residence. Robert enjoyed living in a large house and a comfortable lifestyle. They even offered him money to help him buy an apartment, but he remained steadfast in his decision. Many believed he was holding out for a better financial offer since Joanna came from a wealthy background. Robert was offered progressively larger sums of money until he finally agreed to move out. This decision brought Joanna relief. She no longer felt threatened. They shared custody of their children, and Joanna was waiting for the divorce to be finalized. However, a heated argument erupted over how to divide their house. Despite their prenuptial agreement, Robert refused to give up the property. Unfortunately, they still had to communicate about visits with their son and daughter. They lived apart, and Robert even started dating a flight attendant from his job. Not long into their relationship, she got pregnant. Joanna initially thought this was good news, believing it would help Robert move on from her, but she was mistaken. On November 1, 2010, one of Joanna's close friends received a call from her children's school because Joanna's kids had not shown up. The teachers tried to reach Joanna but could not get a response. They eventually contacted her friend, who was unsure of Joanna's whereabouts. Joanna had planned to fly to the island of Man to visit her parents, leaving uncertainty about when she vanished or what had happened to the children, 9 and 10-year-olds. After receiving a call from the school, Joanna's friend reached out to her mother. The mother mentioned that Joanna should have returned to Ascot after their trip to Isle of Man. Although she hadn't talked to Joanna on her return day, the call made her anxious, so she attempted to contact her daughter. To her dismay, there was no response. Unable to locate Joanna, they decided to notify the police. By this time, Robert had already arranged a meeting with law enforcement, an appointment to discuss a serious family incident in which he was involved. After reviewing the statements, the detectives decided to visit the home of Joanna to check. When they arrived, no one was there. Their repeated knocking went unanswered. The officers chose to force the door open to gain entry. Once inside, they quickly spotted suspicious stains in the hallway that appeared to be blood. Despite a thorough search, they found no evidence of Joanna. There were no signs of anyone, including the children. The police left the house without any leads and returned to the station, where they awaited Robert's arrival for the scheduled meeting. When he arrived, he oddly refused to answer any questions about his wife. This was surprising as he had originally contacted the police and requested the meeting. Due to Joanna's ongoing disappearance, the decision was made to arrest Robert. They intended to conduct a more detailed search of the large property where Joanna lived. The situation remained puzzling, and they were not in a rush to file charges against him. The authorities started searching the entire area while also talking to Joanna's family. They all insisted that she couldn't have simply vanished and had no intention of taking her children anywhere. However, Joanna's relatives expressed negative views about Robert, convinced that he was the only one who could be involved in her disappearance. On the first day of the search, the only verified information was that Robert had taken the children to his brother's house. Joanna's family found some comfort in knowing that Alex and Katie were safe. On November 2, 2010, Robert was questioned again. Whenever the detectives asked him about the events of October 31st, he mostly responded without elaborating. The police then changed their strategy and started discussing everyday topics, which made him more engaged. He excitedly talked about his passion for running. However, when the conversation turned to Joanna, he became withdrawn and anxious. He described his marriage with her but focused on criticizing her, calling her a spoiled child, trying to cast her in a negative light. He repeatedly pointed out that Joanna and her family were financially stable, suggested that they did not understand the struggles of earning money. By the end of the conversation, the police felt that Robert disliked her, particularly because the Simpsons were wealthier than he was. Robert grew up in a modest family in Edinburgh. His father worked at the docks, and his mother was employed by a bank. While they managed their finances well and met their needs, they were not as financially secure as Joanna's family. Robert, a pilot earning around £150,000 a year, had few reasons to complain about his life. Still, he often expressed dissatisfaction with his situation. The detective spent a considerable amount of time discussing various abstract topics with Robert, during which he was quite talkative. However, when they inquired about Joanna and the events of October 31st, he repeatedly said he had no comment. When the detectives expressed confusion, Robert explained that he was experiencing a mental blockage, making it difficult for him to answer those questions. Despite their persistent efforts to encourage him to speak, the detectives were unable to get any more information, forcing them to continue their investigation elsewhere. Joanna's house was extensively searched, revealing additional blood in the living room and in various spots in the courtyard and driveway. The arrangement of the bloodstains indicated that her body might have been relocated. All samples were gathered for testing, which later verified that the blood matched Joanna's. Authorities suspected that Robert had murdered his ex-wife, but the reason for his alleged crime was still unclear. 3 years after their breakup, Robert had begun a new life with another woman. Despite this, he expressed concern for Joanna's financial situation. He had signed a prenuptial agreement, which meant he was not obligated to worry about her finances after their divorce and would not receive any financial support. However, it became clear that Joanna had not been transparent about her family's financial status. Even after they separated, Robert occasionally returned to her home while she was away. He persuaded his children to provide him with a new security code for the alarm system, granting him unrestricted access to the house. Robert's main focus was on his ex-wife's financial documents. He became fixated on the belief that Joanna had significant amounts of money in different accounts. At one point, his imagination ran wild, leading him to believe she possessed up to £25 million, which he thought he could claim if it weren't for their prenuptial agreement. Historically, the British legal system did not recognize these agreements, leading to inevitable legal disputes. However, starting from October 20, 2010, prenuptial agreements began to be acknowledged without extra bureaucratic hurdles. As a result, in the case of a divorce, Robert would not be able to claim any of his wife's wealth, and he was aware of this reality. The next court hearing for the divorce case was set for November 8, 2007, and it seemed likely to be their final meeting before the marriage was officially ended. This context may explain why Robert chose to confront his wife a week earlier. On Sunday, October 31st, Alex and Katie spent the whole day with their father. He was supposed to bring them back to their mother, Joanna, who had been eagerly preparing for their return. She missed them and had baked a chocolate cake as well as made their favorite dish. Joanna usually invited a friend to join her for such occasions because she felt uneasy being alone with her ex, but this time her friend couldn't make it, leaving Joanna to welcome Alex and Katie by herself. The police spoke to the children of Joanna, who provided key details about the situation. The argument between the parents started when Robert returned Alex and Katie to their mother around 4 p.m. Although the children were in a different room and couldn't see what was happening, they heard sounds that seemed like physical violence, described as dull thuds. After a while, the noises stopped. Then, Robert carried Joanna out of the room and placed her in the trunk of his car. He told the children that their mother had fallen and was hurt, so he needed to take her to the hospital. After closing the trunk, he instructed Alex and Katie to get in the car, drove them to his new girlfriend's home, where they stayed. Robert left them there and did not come back until around 7 p.m. When he returned, Joanna was not with him. He avoided answering Alex's questions directly. It became clear that Robert's actions during the 3 hours he was unaccounted for were a mystery, as was Joanna's whereabouts. Later, the police interviewed Robert again, but his answers remained the same. He was questioned a total of 9 times and never mentioned October 31st or anything about his ex-wife. After the final interview, he asked to speak privately with his lawyer. They went into a separate office. About 20 minutes later, his lawyer returned and read a statement in which Robert admitted to killing his ex-wife. Robert explained that he and Joanna had been arguing over their children's education. At one point, he lost control, remembered hitting her several times before deciding to take the children home and rush Joanna away. However, after, he realized that Joanna had already died. In a panic, Robert decided to dump the body and hide it in the woods. His explanation didn't seem credible because Robert could have immediately taken his wife to the hospital. It was also unclear why he chose to hide her in the trunk instead of placing Joanna in the car. It appeared that Robert recognized that Joanna was dead and wanted to shield the children from the sight of their mother, so he concealed her in the trunk. He eventually agreed to lead the investigators to the location where he had hidden Joanna's body. They indeed discovered the body of Joanna at the spot he indicated. It was clear that without Robert's confession, finding the body would have been nearly impossible. He took great care in transporting Joanna several kilometers away from the closest road and into the thick, secluded, near Legoland Windsor woods. There, he dug a deep hole, carefully leveled it, and covered it with leaves to hide any trace of what had happened. The police did not believe Robert because the hole was very deep and showed no signs of freshly dug soil. They estimated that he would have had to remove about 400 kilograms of soil beforehand, which would have taken a significant amount of time. Additionally, the ground was already frozen, making it even more challenging to dig. Given these factors, it seemed impossible that he could have done all this in just 3 hours, and they suspected he had disposed of the soil elsewhere. This suggested he had likely dug a grave in advance, supporting the theory of a carefully planned murder. They found Simpson's body in a black bag inside a plastic box buried underground. Later, Alex and Katie visited the site to lay flowers in memory of their mother. They mentioned they knew the area well and even had a secret hideout nearby. The last time they were there was during the holidays when they were visiting their father. It was likely during that time that he began digging a hole for his ex-wife while the children played in their hideout. Robert continued to assert that he did not plan Joanna's murder. He claimed it was an accident, stating that the stress from a lengthy and challenging divorce caused him to lose control. His lawyer argued that he acted out of passion, which could lead to a lighter sentence for him. However, a forensic examination revealed that Joanna sustained at least 14 blows to the head with a blunt object. The weapon, a hammer with a nail puller, was found at the site where her body was buried. If Robert had not intended to kill her, why did he bring the murder weapon into the house? He later explained that he took the hammer from his shed and secretly placed it in his daughter's backpack, but he could not provide a reason for this. Furthermore, other items discovered with the hammer, such as a protective suit, plastic shoe covers, and rubber gloves, suggested he had planned the crime. After the murder, he removed the CCTV unit from the house along with the hammer and disposed of both, indicating that he had carefully prepared for the act and behaved quite rationally. On May 11, 2011, Brown appeared at Reading Crown Court for a 10-day trial. He denied murdering Joanna but pleaded guilty to manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. The defense presented a psychiatric report indicating that Brown was experiencing a psychotic disorder when he killed her. Initially, a defense psychiatrist diagnosed him with stress-related adjustment disorder. The psychiatrist explained to the jury that significant stressors in Brown's life, including a difficult divorce, contributed to this condition, leading to mental and emotional instability that affected his self-control. However, Philip Joseph, a forensic psychiatrist for the prosecution, disagreed with the defense's assessment. After meeting with Brown in prison, Joseph described him as an intelligent man and a resilient person. He characterized Brown as a controlled person and noted that if Brown were unable to handle stress, it would be challenging for him to continue working as an airline pilot. On the first day of the trial, One of Joanna's friends gave evidence regarding a previous knife incident, when Brown had stabbed Joanna in the chest. In court, Brown denied that this had happened. The trial concluded on May 24. On the murder charge, the jury returned a not guilty verdict. Robert Brown was convicted of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 26 years in prison, including 2 years for obstructing a police investigation. Simpson's family and friends described the failure to convict of murder as a miscarriage of justice. Robert is eligible for mid-term release, with the remainder of his sentence suspended and monitored by the National Probation Service. In March 2023, as Robert could have been released in early November, Simpson's family and friends launched a campaign against it, citing the Police, Crime, Sentencing in Courts Act 2022. This act allows the Attorney General to block the release of any prisoner they believe poses a serious risk to the public. The campaign received support from former Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland, former Home Secretary Priti Patel, Jess Phillips, the then Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding, and Carrie Johnson, an anti-domestic violence campaigner and wife of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. On October 10, Justice Minister Alex Chalk KCMP announced that Robert would not be automatically released from prison but would instead be referred to the parole board. Robert challenged this decision in the High Court, but he was unsuccessful, arguing that Chalk had overturned a decision made by the judge at the original trial. Try to turn pain into strength. Joanna's mother and friend Hetty Barkworth Nanton was awarded a CBE in the 2024 New Year Honors for services to those affected by domestic violence and murder. The story of Meredith Lynn Sullivan Chapman, 33, captured national attention and was one of the most talked about cases of 2018. Born on January 31, 1985, in Newark, Delaware. Meredith was the youngest of 3 children in the Sullivan family. She was raised in a loving environment, supported by her older brother, Thomas, and sister, Jessica, cherished her. The Sullivan family was financially stable, and her parents ensured that their children received an excellent education while also encouraging them to pursue their personal interests and talents. However, everything changed for Meredith when she was in middle school, as her parents decided to divorce. Fortunately, the separation was friendly, with no significant arguments or legal battles, and both parents continued to be actively involved in their children's lives. Although Meredith found the divorce emotionally challenging, she always felt cared for and loved. Meredith was a kind, outgoing person who easily made friends. Her cheerful and engaging personality made her popular among her peers. From a young age, she excelled in school. Learning came easily to her. She was curious, quick to grasp new concepts, and always willing to take the lead. In addition to her academic success, she had a strong passion for painting and was also very active in sports. During high school, she focused on cheerleading, eventually became the team captain. Even as a teenager, Meredith displayed determination and confidence, working hard to achieve her goals. Despite her drive, she treated others with fairness and respect, earning the admiration of both her classmates and teachers. After graduating from high school, Meredith began her studies at the University of Delaware, focusing on corporate communications and social sciences. She quickly adjusted to college life, excelled academically, and received a merit-based scholarship. Meredith stayed active in cheerleading, even giving presentations on it. Additionally, she participated in tennis, dance, and theater productions at the university. In her junior year, she secured an internship at a radio station in Philadelphia, where she managed the station's social media. This experience aligned perfectly with her career goals and deepened her passion for communications. Meredith joined an elite student organization, taking on a significant role that helped her build connections for her future career. For her senior project, she created a documentary about Joe Biden, which received notable recognition, including a nomination for a regional Emmy Award. This success opened opportunities for her in the media and communications field. After graduating with a bachelor's degree in 2007, Meredith worked on Capitol Hill as communications manager for U.S. Congressman Mike Castle and ran a winning campaign for former Delaware State Treasurer Chip Flowers. Her ambition and strong work ethic enabled her to excel in fast-paced environments, and she consistently pursued opportunities for intellectual growth. While in college, Meredith met a slightly older young man named Luke Chapman, who was also a graduate of the University of Delaware. They quickly formed a connection and began dating. Meredith and Luke shared many similarities. Both were intelligent, ambitious, and highly motivated. Luke, like Meredith, aimed for a career in public service, eventually became a member of the New York City Council. For a period, their professional journeys aligned. They both achieved significant accomplishments in their fields. Meredith and Luke had a good income and, shortly after their wedding, bought a large home in a quiet and upscale neighborhood in Fairfield Crest. They chose to delay starting a family to concentrate on their careers in politics. They also adopted a golden retriever named Indy, whom they cared for with the same dedication that others might show to a child. After several years, Meredith changed her career significantly. She left the field of politics to pursue a career in education. She obtained a master's degree in education and returned to the University of Delaware, her former school, where she began teaching public relations and digital marketing courses. She created strategies for social media engagement and researched new communication methods. In addition to teaching, she participated in various university committees. In 2013, Meredith took on the role of marketing director while still lecturing and publishing academic work. Her colleagues and students held her in high regard, praising her intelligence, professionalism, and unwavering dedication. Luke's career was progressing well. He dedicated long hours to work and took his responsibilities seriously. Over time, he and Meredith became deeply focused on their personal ambitions, resulting in them being home together less and less often. As a result, a noticeable distance formed between them. Although they appeared to have a perfect relationship on the outside, the connection between them had faded. Conversations about starting a family had stopped, and their marriage felt more like a formality than a true partnership. However, neither of them rushed to end the relationship, as their living arrangement was functioning adequately. They cohabited more like roommates than spouses, managing their own finances and daily routines separately. There were no fights or confrontations. In public, they projected an image of happiness. No one in their social circle knew what was really happening behind closed doors. In 2016, Meredith chose to re-enter politics, this time as a candidate rather than an assistant or staff member. Driven and ambitious, she launched her campaign to challenge the current senator for Delaware's 8th District, David Soccola. Her campaign gained momentum, and she had a good chance of winning. Ultimately, she lost by a narrow margin of less than 5%. After the election, Meredith returned to her career in education and focused on advancing her academic work. By 2017, she decided to hire an assistant, specifically a creative director, to oversee marketing efforts. She posted the job online and received numerous applications. Meredith personally interviewed each candidate, but one, a 49-year-old named Mark Gerardo, particularly impressed her. He met all the qualifications for the role in terms of experience and skills. During the interview, he made a positive impression and agreed to start working immediately. At that time, Mark was living in North Carolina but was ready to move for the position. He had been married to Jenner Gerardo, but she stayed behind initially to sell their home and finish other obligations before relocating to join him. Mark proved to be a thoughtful, intelligent, and well-educated person with a strong background in marketing. He exceeded expectations right from the start. He quickly built a good working relationship with his new supervisor, and they found common interests almost immediately. Mark was 16 years older than his young boss. At that time, Meredith had grown emotionally distant from the husband she had been with for nearly 10 years, as both were heavily focused on their careers. Mark's situation was more complex. He had been married for almost 25 years and had remained committed to his wife during that time. As co-workers, they developed a close bond. Their teamwork was seamless, and they had a silent understanding of each other. Mark was dependable, efficient, and skilled. However, beneath their professional connection, a deeper relationship was beginning to form, unnoticed by others. For Meredith, Mark became more than just a trusted colleague. She felt comfortable sharing her personal thoughts and feelings with him, which meant a lot to her. In her busy pursuit of success, she had little time for friends, family, or meaningful conversations. Even her husband felt more like a stranger than a partner. But with Mark, she felt calm, safe, and truly understood. She eventually stopped resisting and invited him to spend time together outside of work. Just 2 weeks after Mark moved to Newark, Meredith suggested they meet after work at a local bar to relax. She wanted to have a conversation in a more casual setting. That evening, Mark opened up to her and, for the first time, shared his story. Mark Gerardo was born in 1968. His parents were strict and deeply religious, enforcing high standards of obedience and discipline in their large family. From an early age, Mark understood the importance of hard work and performed well in school. When Mark was 18, he met Jen Eyre, who was 16 and working as a waitress at a fast food restaurant. He often visited the restaurant, captivated by the girl behind the counter, but he never mustered the courage to talk to her or share his feelings. Jen Eyre and her family eventually moved to a nearby town, causing her to lose touch with Mark for several years. In 1990, they met again at a local shopping center where Jen Eyre worked as a sales associate. Mark was excited to see her but felt too shy to make a move. Noticing this, Jen Eyre took the initiative and asked him out first. Their relationship quickly grew deeper, and in 1992, Mark proposed. Jen Eyre happily accepted, and less than a year later, they got married. Mark and Jen Eyre, newly married, settled in Indianapolis, Indiana, where they purchased a home together. At this point, Mark had completed his degree in graphic design and landed a well-paying job in that field. Jen Eyre was successful as a real estate agent, so they enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle. Although they never had children, they adopted 3 dogs that they treated as part of their family. To their friends, neighbors, and relatives, Mark and Jen Eyre appeared to be a perfect couple, deeply in love and genuinely happy. They rarely had public disagreements. Their home was known for its peaceful atmosphere. Both were strong, independent individuals with stable incomes and lives. By the mid-2000s, after being together for over 20 years, the Gerardos faced difficulties. Mark experienced the loss of both his parents in a short time, while Jen Eyre, who had put a lot of effort into starting her own business, encountered significant financial troubles. Overwhelmed by emotional and financial stress, they decided to make a big change in their lives. They sold their house and moved to the peaceful town of Greenville, South Carolina. Mark quickly secured a stable job in marketing, while Jen Eyre opted to focus on family life as she looked for the right job opportunity. During this time, they traveled a lot and spent quality time together. The emotional distance that had developed between them began to disappear. Their relationship rekindled, and for a year and a half, they experienced what felt like a second honeymoon. In 2017, Mark started looking for new job opportunities to find a more fulfilling role with better pay. During his search, he found a job posting from Meredith. The couple was not afraid of the move. Mark went ahead first because the job needed him to start right away, while Jen Eyre stayed behind to sell their house and take care of local affairs. She planned to join him in Newark about a month later. That evening, Mark shared his story with Meredith, who listened carefully. In return, she talked about her own life, including her career successes and the slow deterioration of her marriage. As they talked, they connected on a deeper level, feeling as if they had known each other for years. They built a strong sense of trust and stayed at the bar until late at night. Afterward, they went back to Mark's apartment and spent the night together. This marked the beginning of a private relationship that they kept hidden from others. They continued to see each other secretly, often meeting at Mark's place while his wife was out of state. For Meredith, starting a romance with Mark didn't pose any real challenges. Her marriage to Luke had long become a mere formality. For Mark, the situation was much more complicated. First, he had never cheated in his 25 years of marriage. Second, he found himself unexpectedly attracted to Meredith, who was much younger than him. Third, he knew that Meredith was still legally married, just like he was. Despite these issues, Mark and Meredith's relationship continued even after Jen Eyre moved to Newark. From the beginning, Jen Eyre felt that something was off. She sensed that another woman had been in their new home, but she chose not to confront her husband right away. Instead, she decided to gather information to confirm her suspicions. Mark often worked late and became more distant from his family. When Jen Eyre asked him about it, he attributed his behavior to tiredness and a heavy workload. Their physical closeness had almost vanished. This continued for several months until Jen Eyre confronted him about the possibility of infidelity. Mark denied it. Although he attempted to end his affair with Meredith, their bond was too strong, and after a short break, they resumed their secret meetings. Meredith had made a decision. After discussing it with her husband, Luke, they agreed to proceed with a peaceful divorce. On February 14, 2018, Valentine's Day, Jen Eyre confronted Mark. She revealed that she was aware of his affair with his boss. She had hired a private investigator who followed Mark, took compromising photos, and recorded the locations where he met Meredith. With this evidence, Mark had no escape. However, he tried to justify his actions, assuring Jen Eyre that he would end the affair to save their marriage. Unfortunately, this promise was short-lived, as he continued his relationship with Meredith, but now with more caution. Jen Eyre didn't trust Mark, so she decided to keep a close watch on him. She placed a GPS device in his car and installed monitoring software on his phone and computer. She sewed listening devices into Mark's clothes to secretly record his conversations when they were apart. One of those recordings captured Jen Eyre's growing insecurity. The situation escalated when Mark discovered the tracking device. Realizing he could no longer put off an important decision, he told Jen Eyre that he had fallen in love with Meredith, his boss, and wanted to be with her. He also announced his plans to file for divorce. This news was a severe shock for Jen Eyre, who was 47 at the time. After nearly 25 years of marriage, her husband was leaving her for a younger woman. To make things worse, they had recently moved to a new city, and Jen Eyre had not yet found a job. This left her feeling financially unstable, emotionally unsupported, and lost. Her life felt like it was falling apart, and she was struggling to cope. By early March 2018, Meredith completed her divorce from Luke and was no longer tied to any commitments. She anticipated that Mark would also finalize his divorce soon, but his situation was more complicated. Due to specific legal requirements in their new state, Mark needed to establish residency before he could file for divorce, and they had only recently moved. At the same time, Meredith resigned from her job at the University of Delaware. She was about to start a new role as Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at Villanova University, one of Pennsylvania's top institutions. Additionally, she received an offer for a leadership position at Ruffalo Noel Levitz, a prominent consulting firm specializing in higher education strategy. On April 5th, Meredith moved into her new home in Radnor Township, Pennsylvania. She was gradually getting settled, and about a week later, Mark joined her. He had also left his previous job and started a new role at Villanova University as Meredith's personal assistant. It felt like a fresh start for the couple, a promising new chapter. They just needed to complete a few final steps to fully embrace this new beginning, but they were unaware that a deadly threat was already approaching. Hurt and betrayed, Jen Eyre began plotting a disturbing act of revenge. On April 23, 2018, Mark and Meredith had plans to meet at a local restaurant to celebrate a fresh start. Before heading to the restaurant, Meredith stopped by her house to change clothes while Mark ordered their meal and waited for her. As time went by, Meredith didn't arrive, and she wasn't answering her phone, making Mark uneasy. Suddenly, he received a series of alarming messages from Jen Eyre, filled with anger and resentment. She wished him endless misery, and then he received a photo that shocked him. It was a picture of Meredith's kitchen. In a panic, Mark abandoned everything and rushed to Meredith's house. When he arrived, he saw her car parked in the driveway. A black Chevrolet was also parked down the street, but Mark didn't pay much attention to it at the time. The lights were on inside the house, and the front door was unlocked. However, as soon as he stepped inside, he was met with silence. He went directly to the kitchen, was horrified to find Meredith, 33, and Jen Eyre, 48, lying on the floor in large pools of blood. It was too late for them, both died from gunshot wounds. Mark screamed and rushed outside. His cries alarmed the nearby neighbors, who quickly called for emergency services. Initially, investigators thought Mark might have been involved in the incident due to his emotional struggles and complicated relationship with Jenner. However, this theory was quickly dismissed. The weapon was discovered under Jenner's body and contained only her fingerprints. Authorities concluded that the act was premeditated, followed by her own self-harm. Before the incident, Jenner had sent several emails to a close friend expressing her intentions to do something drastic. Later evidence showed she had spent around 2 weeks preparing for this. She bought a firearm, rented a car, and collected items for a disguise. Jenner also managed to find Meredith's new address on her own. For an entire week, she observed the couple's activities. Neighbors reported seeing a woman in a wig driving a black Chevrolet and lingering in the area, but she did not seem threatening. Mark also remembered noticing the car but thought it belonged to someone from the neighborhood. Jenner had closely observed Meredith's routine and was aware of when they typically returned home. On the day of the incident, she arrived early, parked her car a few blocks away, and approached their house. She gained entry by breaking a window in the backyard and quietly entered. It is believed her intention was to confront, kill both Mark and Meredith before taking her own life. However, things did not go as planned. Meredith came home alone. Investigators later discovered that Meredith had taken out a life insurance policy valued at $500,000 about a year and a half prior, naming her ex-husband, Luke, as the beneficiary. After the divorce, this designation had not been changed. As a result, Luke Chapman became a person of interest as authorities looked into possible indirect involvement in the case. However, this theory was ultimately ruled out due to insufficient evidence. The investigation took only a few days, and authorities quickly closed the case, concluding that the responsible person was deceased, that there were no other suspects. Mark was exonerated but faced significant public and media scrutiny. Rather than withdrawing, he decided to speak out, giving interviews and appearing on talk shows to discuss the events in detail. A year later, Mark released a memoir detailing his relationships with both women and the circumstances surrounding the tragic incident. He expressed how deeply the experience affected him, noting that he never expected the woman he had been with for nearly 25 years could do something so devastating. While the book became a bestseller and was generally well received, public opinion was mixed. Some critics accused him of exploiting the situation and profiting from the tragedy by sharing his personal story. Meredith's family sued Luke after he refused to return the life insurance money he received after her death. The court ruled in his favor, ordering him to return only 10% of the total amount to her family, as the judge found no malicious intent on his part. Meredith had not expected to die and had not updated her policy before her passing. After she died, her remains were cremated, and her urn was given to her parents. Jenner Gerardo was buried in her hometown of Fort Wayne, Indiana. Many still believe that Mark was also meant to be a victim that night but narrowly escaped a tragic fate. Magdalena Aguilar Romero, a vibrant young woman with great potential, repeatedly sought help to protect herself from her abusive ex-husband. Despite her persistent pleas for safety, she received no response. Magdalena, also known as Magda Aguilar Romero, later took on the last name Arciniega after her marriage. She was born on November 18, 1990, in Tasca de Alarcón, a mining town in Guerrero, southwestern Mexico. As the youngest of 3 siblings and the only daughter of their family, she was raised in a challenging environment. Her father worked in a local silver mine, which was a demanding and hazardous job. Despite the health and safety risks, his work provided a steady income to support their large family. Her mother was a stay-at-home mom who focused on raising her 3 children and managing the household. With her husband's reliable income, the family always had what they needed. While they weren't rich, they lived in a spacious and comfortable home. Their sons and Magdalena went to good schools, they participated in sports and other activities. By the mid-1990s, they bought their first car. Magdalena's parents and older brothers cherished, pampered her. She was smart, kind, and sociable. She excelled in school. In middle school, she developed a strong interest in biology and anatomy. Initially, Magdalena aspired to become a cardiologist, but in high school, her focus shifted to nutrition, healthy eating, and wellness. She decided to pursue a career in this area to help people facing health issues related to their diet and eating habits. When Magdalena told her family about her plans, they fully supported her. As a dedicated student, she easily gained admission to a top university to study nutrition. She was determined to become an expert in her field. Instead of moving into the dorms, Magdalena chose to live at home with her family, commuting to university by bus, despite the nearly hour-long journey each way. She still managed to keep up with her sports activities and attended dance classes. Her intense focus on her studies left little time for a personal life, but everything changed in 2011. That year, 20-year-old Magdalena met 35-year-old Cesar Gomez Arciniega, who also hailed from Tasca del Arcon. Cesar owned a successful bar that was a beloved spot in the neighborhood. Locals frequented it to relax after work, share stories, enjoy delicious food, and drink what many considered the best beer in town. Initially, Magdalena ignored the advances and romantic gestures from the older man, Cesar. However, he was persistent. He proved to be intelligent, well-read, and genuinely engaging. He wooed her with poetry, flowers, meaningful gifts. Eventually, she found him charming, succumbed to his attention. Their relationship progressed rapidly. At first, Cesar appeared reliable and mature, someone she could envision a future with. Shortly after they started dating, Magdalena found out she was pregnant. This news shocked her, but Cesar was thrilled. He promptly expressed his desire to marry her. Magdalena agreed to his proposal. Both her family and Cesar's relatives supported the marriage, with no objections or obstacles to their union. In 2011, they officially tied the knot in a simple ceremony at a local chapel, attended by only close relatives and a few friends. After the wedding, Magdalena moved into Cesar's home, which was located in the same building as his bar. At that time, she was in her third year of college, but with a baby on the way and the responsibilities of being a newlywed, she chose to pause her studies to focus on her expanding family. Cesar supported this decision. He was thrilled to have his young wife close by. With a steady income from the family business, Magdalena didn't have to work and had everything she needed. She adjusted to domestic life. Soon they welcomed their first son. Less than a year later, Magdalena discovered she was expecting again. In the summer of 2013, she gave birth to their second son. Things began to change in early 2014 when Magdalena decided to go back to school to complete her degree. This decision led to strong opposition from her husband, Cesar, who insisted she should wait a few more years. He argued that their young sons needed their mother at home full-time. However, Magdalena was eager to return to her studies, especially since her parents were willing to help take care of the boys. They fully supported her ambition to finish her education. Magdalena quickly adjusted to being a student again, but Cesar reacted negatively. He became increasingly jealous and controlling, wanting to know her whereabouts at all times and often starting arguments over minor issues. Initially, Magdalena thought his behavior would improve, but instead, it only escalated. Cesar had developed an overwhelming need to control everything during their nearly 3.5 years of marriage. Under the pretense of acting in her best interests, he gradually isolated Magdalena from her friends and family. Their marriage occurred just a few months after they met when she was already pregnant, leaving her with little time or energy to socialize. After the births of their two sons in quick succession, she became even more detached from the outside world. Now that she had returned to school, Magdalena was beginning to rebuild her social life. She reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and started visiting her parents regularly, who were excited to spend time with their grandsons. Cesar began to check Magdalena's phone every day, monitor her social media accounts, and watch her closely. His jealousy intensified, leading him to become unjustly suspicious and accuse her of things she had never done. He forbade her from wearing makeup or perfume, wouldn't allow her to wear heels, even started choosing her clothes for her. To avoid fights, Magdalena reluctantly accepted his demands, but that wasn't enough for Cesar. Eventually, he issued an ultimatum: she could no longer go to college. However, Magdalena was determined not to give up on her dreams of becoming a certified nutritionist, especially when she had just over a year left until graduation. This situation turned her life into a daily struggle, as Cesar continued to impose new restrictions and rules to control her actions. By spring 2014, after ongoing pressure and emotional manipulation, Magdalena had to pause her education again. Influenced by him, she stopped communicating with her friends, even her relatives. She rarely left her house and completely stopped visiting her parents. Her parents grew suspicious when Magdalena missed a family celebration, something she had always attended. Her excuse was vague: she said she was swamped with housework. A month later, she also missed her grandmother's birthday and her parents' wedding anniversary. During phone calls with her mother, Magdalena seemed distant. She gave short answers, avoided direct questions, as if someone was listening nearby. Once lively, cheerful, she had become withdrawn. She stopped allowing family visits and made excuses whenever someone wanted to come over. One day, her older brother visited unexpectedly and was shocked by what he saw. Magdalena looked completely different. She had lost significant weight, seemed fearful and exhausted. She neglected her own well-being, flinched at the smallest noises. It turned out that Cesar had been taking her phone away and only let her make calls when he was around. He had broken her spirit, even started showing aggression in front of their young sons. Despite this, when her older brother offered to take them back to their parents' home, Magdalena refused. She insisted that she would manage on her own. Her brother couldn't remain silent about what he had witnessed. He informed their parents everything, and together they began discussing how to help Magdalena. However, they struggled to communicate with her freely because Cesar was always nearby. He treated her like property, someone he could control entirely, and he had no intention of letting her go. In August 2014, after yet another episode of aggression, Magdalena reached her breaking point. Once Cesar left to run an errand, she discreetly contacted her brother, asked for his help to escape. She quickly packed only essential items and documents, gathered her children, and sneaked out through the back door to avoid running into Cesar's mother, who lived with them. Despite witnessing the abuse, her mother-in-law had always supported her son. The brother took Magdalena and the boys to their parents' house. As expected, Cesar became very angry when he learned that his wife had left with their children. He went to his in-laws' home, demanding Magdalena return, but her father and brothers prevented him from entering, threatened to call the police if he didn't leave right away. The next few months were like a nightmare for Magdalena and her sons. They only left the house when accompanied by her father or brothers because they were afraid Cesar might try to kidnap them. Magdalena reached out to the local authorities for protection from her partner's harassment, but the police did not consider her situation to be a serious threat and denied her request for help. A month after moving out, Magdalena decided to file for divorce. At that point, Cesar changed his approach. He started apologizing and begging her to return, insisting he had changed and would never harm her again, while expressing his love for her. However, Magdalena didn't believe him. She knew him well enough to see that he was just trying to manipulate her again. For a while, he attempted to persuade her to come back, but when he realized she was not going to return, he resorted to threats, emotional pressure. Magdalena often felt anxious, constantly checking her surroundings in fear that he might appear unexpectedly. She visited the police twice more in hopes of obtaining a restraining order against Cesar, but both times her requests were denied. The officers insisted that she was not in any real danger. By early 2015, their divorce was finalized. The court decided that their sons would live with their mother while their father would have visitation rights, including weekends and holidays. At that point, Cesar seemed to have calmed down. He stopped reaching out to his ex-wife and appeared to be moving on with his life. This change allowed Magdalena to finally relax. She returned to college, earned her degree, soon found a good job at a private clinic in her field. Surrounded by friends and family, she began to thrive, earning a stable income and making plans for her future. Nearly 3 years had gone by since the divorce. Cesar no longer attempted to interfere in Magdalena's life. He adhered to the set schedule for picking up and dropping off the boys. Sometimes, Magdalena would go to his house to collect them, but she never went by herself. Her father or one of her brothers always accompanied her. Although Cesar tried to be friendly, Magdalena never felt completely safe around him. Deep down, she knew she could never trust him again. The years she spent living with him, filled with emotional and physical abuse, had left a lasting impact. On January 13, 2018, the boys were with their father. The Romero family was supposed to attend a memorial service at a local church for a recently deceased relative that day. Magdalena informed her mother that she would be late because Cesar, the boys' father, had refused to take them to the church. She arranged to pick them up herself and agreed to meet Cesar at a park near his house. After waiting for about 30 minutes, Cesar called to inform her that he had a sudden errand and had left the boys with his mother, who was unwell and unable to bring them to the park. With no other option, Magdalena decided to go directly to her former mother-in-law's house. While on her way, she called her mother to explain the situation and assured her she would arrive at the church within 30 minutes with the boys. That was the last time her mother heard from her daughter. Magdalena never arrived at the church. Her phone first went unanswered and then was turned off completely. Concerned about Magdalena, her parents started contacting her friends, but no one had seen her. Trying to reach Cesar also yielded no results. That night, filled with increasing worry, the Romeros went to the police to report Magdalena as missing. However, the officers did not take their concerns seriously. They pointed out that Magdalena was an adult and not required to check in regularly, adding that it had only been a few hours since anyone had last heard from her. The following day, the police again declined to start a formal search for the same reasons. Magdalena's parents took action, reaching out to everyone they knew for help. They quickly informed relatives and friends, who joined the search for her. News of Magdalena's disappearance spread rapidly on social media, with many sharing her and her son's photos, urging anyone with information to speak up. Flyers were put up throughout the town and on utility poles. When her parents visited Cesar's house, he refused to let them in. He expressed worry about Magdalena and the boys being missing, but he falsely claimed she had taken them and mentioned visiting someone. In reality, Magdalena had told her mother she was going to pick up the boys from Cesar's house to take them to church. The Romeros soon realized something was wrong and suspected that Cesar was not telling the truth. They approached the police again, but the authorities still would not open a missing persons case. They also refused to question Cesar or search his home, claiming there was no reason to do so. Feeling hopeless, Magdalena's parents kept searching on their own for over a week. As their fear and frustration increased, they began to organize public demonstrations to raise awareness about the case and pressure the authorities to act. Eventually, these efforts started to yield results. A neighbor of Cesar contacted the police to report that the boys were at their father's house. Other witnesses later stated they had seen Magdalena entering Cesar's home on the day she disappeared, but no one saw her leave. The public outcry from the Romero family eventually compelled law enforcement to take action. On January 22, 2018, a search warrant was issued for Cesar's residence. What investigators found inside was shocking. The police said that Romero's legs and arms were found inside a pot on the stove, while her cooked pelvis was discovered in a bag near the stove. The rest of her body was found in a nearby refrigerator. Cesar and his mother were caught off guard by the arrival of the police and had not cleaned the area beforehand. The officers brought in Magdalena's parents to identify her remains. The state of her body was distressing, but her parents quickly recognized their daughter. The shock was overwhelming for her mother, and she needed immediate medical help. A forensic examination revealed that Magdalena had suffered severe beatings before her death, which was caused by mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled. The most distressing detail that came to light later was that their sons, only 6 and 4.5 years old at the time, had been inside the house throughout the entire incident and witnessed everything. The violent attack on their mother occurred right in front of them. Sadly, they became important witnesses in the subsequent court case. Even though they were young and didn't fully understand what had happened, The older son later told investigators that he saw his father hitting and choking his mother as she screamed, tried to escape. He remembered how Cesar dragged her into the kitchen while their grandmother tried to keep the boys from coming in. The older boy disobeyed and peeked inside, only to see something terrifying. Cesar quickly became the main suspect. However, when the police arrived, they only found his mother and the boys at the house. Cesar had somehow escaped just hours before the search, almost as if he knew the authorities were coming. He took as much cash as he could and disappeared. That same day, his mother was arrested and taken to jail to await trial. She remained calm, even indifferent, when confronted by the police. She did not deny her role in the incidents involving her former daughter-in-law and showed no signs of remorse. Cesar's mother had always been aware of how her son treated his wife, but she consistently sided with Cesar. The investigation showed that while she didn't directly commit the crime, she was aware of her son's plans. She helped bring Magdalena to their home and concealing the evidence. Detectives were particularly disturbed by one aspect of the case: some body parts were cooked into a thick stew. Cesar's mother could not provide a clear explanation for these actions. During the trial, Magdalena's sons testified against Cesar's mothers, as they had witnessed the traumatic events involving their mother. The older boy had sneaked into the kitchen and saw hands boiling in a pot, along with his mother's head in the freezer. The trauma from these experiences was profound, requiring extensive therapy for the boys to start healing and to overcome their nightmares. In November 2019, the court found Cesar's mother guilty of concealment of evidence. Throughout the proceedings, she never expressed any remorse for her actions. The main suspect, Cesar, was the focus of a nationwide manhunt, but authorities could not locate him right after the incident. His mother said she did not know where he had gone. Despite significant media attention, public protests calling for justice, and extensive searches, Cesar remained missing. Authorities searched for him for over 4 years, both in Mexico and internationally, even enlisting Interpol's help, but all leads eventually went cold. In early July 2022, an unexpected incident occurred in Tijuana, a border city, when a bar fight broke out between two drunk patrons. The police arrested both men, one of whom was identified as Massimo Herrera Garcia. However, once at the police station, fingerprint analysis revealed he was actually Cesar Gomez Arciniega, a wanted fugitive who had been living under a false identity to escape capture. His intoxicated and aggressive behavior led to his arrest. After being identified, he was sent back to his hometown to await trial. He stalled the legal process by frequently changing attorneys, delaying the trial until fall 2023. By that time, Magdalena's sons had grown older and could better articulate their experiences. They testified against their father. In November 2023, Cesar was convicted of the premeditated and brutal murder of his ex-wife. The court deemed the crime as gender-based, recognizing that it stemmed from years of accumulated desire for revenge after their divorce. He received a sentence of 55 years in prison without the chance for parole. Magdalena's sons were then placed in the care of their maternal grandparents, who had worked tirelessly to seek justice for their mother. At around 3:30 a.m., Shauna Taife returned home after a long work shift. The streets were silent, and everything appeared normal as she parked in her garage. She entered her home, likely hoping for some much-needed rest. However, someone was already inside, lurking in the shadows. Soon after, a horrifying event occurred. By sunrise, police had surrounded her home, and the findings of the investigation stunned everyone. Shauna was born on March 13, 1966, in Salt Lake City, Utah, a place known for its snowy mountains and strong Mormon traditions. She was one of 7 siblings and showed her creativity from a young age, often getting lost in books or drawing. School represented more to her than just classes. She had a vibrant personality, became a cheerleader, and had a large group of friends. During her teenage years, her family moved first to Broomall, Pennsylvania, and then to North Virginia. Each of these moves helped her build resilience and fueled her desire to create a life of her own. In 1994, at the age of 28, Shauna took a significant step by leaving her familiar surroundings to move west to Las Vegas, Nevada, a vibrant city known for its constant reinvention. Las Vegas welcomed her with its bright lights and energetic atmosphere. She started her new journey by working in a luxury department store. Later, she switched to the hospitality industry, beginning as bartender at Fiesta Hotel and eventually securing a sought-after role at the renowned Palms Casino Resort. There, surrounded by glamour and a demanding clientele, Shauna flourished. Her co-workers felt like family to her. Her job provided both satisfaction and financial security. Shauna radiated warmth with her light blonde hair, stylish appearance, and graceful presence that captured attention. However, it wasn't just her physical beauty that attracted people, it was her genuine kindness, cheerful laughter, and ability to connect with others on a personal level. Her friends described her as vibrant, positive, and committed, someone who discovered joy in the small moments of life. In 2002, Shauna's life changed once more when she met George Taillefer. He was tall, athletic, and exuded confidence, someone who made a strong first impression. George had an impressive background. He was a former star football player in high school, prom king, a West Point graduate, and later became a U.S. Army engineer before becoming a firefighter. He had a magnetic personality and a kind heart, known for his willingness to help others, including financially supporting his mother, who took care of his disabled sister. Their connection was immediate and powerful. Friends admired the way they complemented each other, two ambitious, charismatic people who seemed meant to be together. Their love story grew stronger with the birth of their daughter, Madison Taylor Taillefer. For Shauna, becoming a mother was everything. She cherished every moment with Madison, enjoying hours of karaoke, laughter, and making unforgettable memories. On March 16, 2006, Shauna and George celebrated their love with a wedding by the beach in Hawaii, surrounded by ocean waves and gentle breezes. However, beneath this beautiful moment, challenges were already starting to emerge. 2 years into their marriage, problems began to emerge. The 2008 housing market crash severely impacted George, creating financial stress that affected their relationship. Shauna loved to spend money, while George wanted to save, which led to frequent and heated arguments over issues that were once trivial. George's growing frustration turned into possessiveness, criticism, and emotional distance. His hurtful comments, especially when directed at Shauna in front of Madison, stung deeply. Compounding these issues was George's increasing friendship with Noel Stevens, a homeless man he had brought in to help with yard work. Although George had always been sympathetic to those in need, Shauna felt uneasy about Stevens. His constant presence in their home only intensified the emotional rift between them. As the months went by, the tension between Shauna and George increased, leading to the breakdown of their relationship. After nearly 10 years together, Shauna made the tough decision to leave, taking their daughter Madison with her. She relocated to a quiet suburb near Las Vegas, hoping that the change would bring her clarity. Although she had separated from George, she wasn't ready to give up entirely. Divorce wasn't an option yet, and she still held on to some hope. Maybe with time and counseling, they could reconnect. Shauna and George agreed to try marriage counseling as a last effort to save their relationship. While the counseling sessions prompted some reflection, they couldn't bridge the emotional gap between them. As they continued living apart, the possibility of reconciliation became more difficult to envision. By September 2012, Shauna's hope had diminished, and the future she once imagined felt increasingly out of reach. Then something unexpected happened that shattered any sense of safety Shauna had left. One evening, after returning home from work, she found her house in disarray. Someone had broken in. Her belongings were scattered everywhere, drawers were opened, and several personal items were missing, including her engagement ring, some underwear, a bikini, and a black dress. Strangely, the intruder had left behind a small, folded pair of boxers on the washing machine and had taken vodka from the fridge. This violation deeply affected Shauna. It didn't feel like a random burglary, it felt personal. Although shaken, she tried to move on by focusing on her work and caring for Madison, but the feeling of unease lingered. On the early morning of September 29, 2012, Shauna finished her shift at the casino and clocked out at 3:01 a.m. After walking through the employee exit, she got into her car for the usual 30-minute drive home. By around 3:30 a.m., Shauna arrived home, parked in the garage, and entered through the interior door. As she walked toward the staircase, she was unaware of the attacker waiting in the shadows. Suddenly, she was struck violently on the head with a hammer, causing her to collapse. The assault continued. Despite Shauna pleading for her life, asking why is he doing this repeatedly, her attacker remained silent and continued to strike her. When she finally stopped moving, the assailant fled through the same garage door that Shauna had used, taking the hammer with him. A few hours later, just after 9 a.m., George finished his shift at the fire station. Like he usually did when Shauna worked late, he picked up Madison from his mother's house. Shauna and George shared custody, and Madison was going to stay with her father for a few days. George then drove to Shauna's house to gather some of Madison's belongings. However, as he got closer, he sensed that something was wrong. The garage door was open. Shauna was always very careful and never left the garage door open, especially overnight. This detail filled George with a sense of dread. As he entered the house, his worst fears came true. The inside was a mess, and it was clear there had been a struggle. Then he saw her. Shauna was lying motionless on the floor, and blood was everywhere around her. George called 911, told the dispatcher he had found his wife and she wasn't moving. His voice sounded calm. However, there were times when his words stumbled. When first responders arrived, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. Investigators were shocked by the brutality of the attack. Shauna had sustained severe injuries to her head, so extreme that paramedics initially thought they might be gunshot wounds. However, further forensic examination uncovered the reality: she had been struck repeatedly with a blunt object in a violent assault. Her hands were badly injured and bruised, showing signs of defensive wounds. She had fought back. In her final moments, she displayed incredible bravery. Detectives initially focused on George, following standard procedure in domestic homicide cases, where they questioned those closest to the victim first. However, George had a solid alibi. He had been working for 24 hours straight at the fire station, which was confirmed by his co-workers and supervisors. With that lead ruled out, the investigators shifted their attention elsewhere. Shauna's murder deeply affected her friends and co-workers, many of whom also worked late shifts at the Palms Casino Resort. The brutal nature of the crime and a break-in that had occurred weeks earlier left them feeling vulnerable and scared. They began to question whether someone had been watching them as well and whether the attack was random or targeted. Detectives revisited the earlier break-in at Shauna's home from 3 weeks prior. This incident had unsettled her. Personal items were stolen, including her underwear, bikini, and engagement ring, while a strange pair of men's boxers was found neatly folded on the washing machine. The details of the break-in didn't align with a typical burglary, making the situation feel even more menacing. Neighbors reported hearing loud, rhythmic thuds between 3:30 and 4 a.m. on the morning of Shauna's murder. This timing matched her arrival home, indicating she may have been attacked shortly after entering. Soon after, another clue emerged. Shauna's personal items, such as her cell phone, health card, and makeup, were discovered scattered along a trail about half a mile from her home. This evidence suggested that the killer had escaped on foot in that direction. William Penix, commonly known as Big Will, was a well-known handyman and mentor to recently released inmates in the Las Vegas community. One of these inmates, a man nicknamed Greyhound, confessed to a shocking crime. With an unsettling casualness, Greyhound recounted how he had attacked a woman with a hammer, even smiling as he mentioned the hammer breaking from the impact. Big Will was initially taken aback, but when he saw news coverage of Shauna's murder, the details began to align in his mind. He promptly alerted the authorities, informing them that Greyhound often loitered at a nearby Albertsons, where he scavenged and sold banned substance. Across the street at a Chevron gas station, Greyhound was known for regularly dealing banned substance. Law enforcement quickly located and arrested him there. Greyhound was found with narcotics and revealed his real name, Noel Stevens. This was not the first time his name had come up. Stevens had a criminal history that included petty theft, banned substance offenses, and squatting. Now, he was a suspect in a murder case. During the interrogation, he denied being involved in Shauna's death, but he admitted that he had been living in a tent on a remote hill. The police were concerned he might have hidden evidence there, so they used helicopters to survey the area and searched his campsite. They quickly found crucial evidence. Inside the tent, investigators discovered a pair of pants with blood stains. Forensic testing confirmed their worst fears: it was Shauna's blood. Digital records provided crucial information. Phone data showed a startling revelation: Stevens was in regular contact with George. Their connection was more complex and troubling than anyone realized. George had employed Stevens for various tasks at home, but he had also reportedly taken advantage of Stevens' weaknesses and desperation. With the promise of thousands to Noel, George orchestrated a plan to end his wife's life. From the start, Shauna's sister, Paula Castleton, suspected something was off. Even with George's strong alibi, she felt he wasn't innocent and decided to travel to Las Vegas to assist with the investigation. Believing that something more sinister had occurred behind the scenes, her instincts turned out to be alarmingly correct. When the police who searched Stevens' campsite discovered incriminating evidence, stolen clothing from Shauna's previous burglary and a vodka bottle with his DNA on it. This bottle was the same type used in the burglary weeks before her murder. Additionally, they found a packaging tag for a hammer, which was one of the weapons used in the assault. Surveillance footage later confirmed that George and Stevens were seen together at a hardware store, appearing relaxed and laughing while they bought a hammer, gloves, and a knife. What initially seemed random now clearly indicated premeditation. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Stevens admitted his guilt. He revealed that George had given him $600 in advance and promised to pay him thousands more once the job was completed. For several weeks, they had planned the murder meticulously. Phone records confirmed their confession, revealing 87 calls between the two in September 2012, including 5 calls made the night before the murder. Stevens stated that George had provided keys to Shauna's house, even recommended that they wear black and break in beforehand. On the night of September 29th, Stevens entered the house, concealed himself in a closet, and waited. As Shauna ascended the stairs, he came out from the shadows. Wearing a ski mask, he hit her with a hammer. When the handle broke, he used the metal head to complete the attack. Afterward, he disappeared into the night. Later, Stevens guided investigators to the location where he had buried the murder weapon, which still had Shauna's blood on it. On October 8th, detectives approached George's family to inform them that he was now a primary suspect in a crime. This news shocked his mother and sister, who found it hard to believe that he could commit such an act. As the pressure mounted, George began to crack. Fearing the police were closing in on him, he drove dangerously through Las Vegas and crashed his car into a concrete barrier without any signs of braking. Authorities suspected it was an end-his-life attempt. Fortunately, he survived the crash while wearing his seatbelt, but he was arrested at the hospital. Both George and Noel Stevens were charged with murder. In exchange for a lesser sentence, Stevens pleaded guilty and testified against George, avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to 42 years in prison. George's trial started in August 2015. Despite his difficult background, history of banned substance use, and ongoing mental health struggles, Stevens became the prosecution's main witness. During his testimony, he described a manipulative friendship with George. He told the court that George often complained about Shauna, expressing anger over her spending and bitterness about their failing marriage. Initially, when George proposed getting rid of Shauna, Stevens found it amusing. However, when the offer reached $5,000, he agreed to it. In truth, Stevens only received $600. During the trial, the defense focused on questioning Stevens' credibility. They highlighted his past, his struggles with addiction to argue he was not trustworthy. They contended that the tools in question were merely bought for home repairs. However, it wasn't solely Stevens' testimony that implicated George. The evidence included surveillance footage, phone records, the presence of Shauna's blood on Stevens' possessions, and a consistent timeline. Together, these elements painted a clear picture of premeditated murder. The prosecution described George as a man fixated on maintaining control, struggling to cope with financial troubles, a failing marriage, and the fear of losing influence over Shauna. While family members testified that he was dedicated and principled, witnesses observed that his previously admired discipline had turned dangerous. The evidence painted a different picture. In 2015, George Taife was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole, along with an additional 81 years for related charges. He later appealed his conviction, claiming that a mix of medications, such as Adderall, estrogen blockers, and painkillers prescribed after a workplace injury, impaired his judgment. In a handwritten confession, he stated that the drugs affected his decision-making. He also contended that his defense attorney failed to address his mental health issues and did not seek a psychiatric evaluation. However, his appeal was denied, and the conviction remained. After the tragedy, the most heartbreaking consequence was Madison, Shauna's daughter, who witnessed the aftermath of her mother's murder. She now lives with Shauna's mother, away from the man who tried to ruin their lives. From this unimaginable loss, Shauna's family has created something powerful, Justice for Shauna, a campaign aimed at raising awareness about domestic abuse and manipulation. Shauna's story serves as a cautionary tale about love that turned dangerous, trust that was betrayed, and a justice system that, despite its flaws, eventually uncovered the truth. At the heart of it all is the memory of a vibrant woman who loved deeply and deserved so much more. Emily Beatriz Azevedo Sena was born in Várzea Grande, a city in the Brazil state of Mato Grosso. She lived with her mother and her stepfather, who became a father figure to her when she was 6. He worked as a radiology technician at Santa Helena Hospital in the nearby city of Cuiabá. The family lived a modest yet close-knit life. Emily was known for her kind nature, calm demeanor. Classmates and neighbors often described her as a gentle person who avoided conflict. At 16, Emily found out she was pregnant, a surprising discovery that she ultimately accepted. The father was a young partner of similar age. Instead of pulling away, he supported her throughout the situation. They started living together and he actively participated in getting ready for the baby's arrival. He went with Emily to doctor visits, assisted with planning, took part in conversations about names and baby items. Despite their youth, her partner demonstrated a strong sense of responsibility, dedication. Although their relationship encountered challenges because of their age, it was characterized as stable, supportive. For Emily, becoming pregnant was a major milestone in her life. She eagerly talked about her future daughter and shared her excitement with family, friends. Her mother and stepfather were very supportive, helping her choose furniture, buy clothes, prepare the nursery. Their home was filled with joy and anticipation. They celebrated the gender reveal twice, once with her partner's relatives and again with Emily's family. Friends remembered how glowing she looked when discussing her journey to motherhood. In another part of Mato Grosso, Natalie Helen Martins Pereira, a 25-year-old married to Christian Albino Cibalho de Arruda, 28, was raising their 3 children, a girl and 2 boys. Natalie worked in public safety, officially employed by the fire department while also taking nursing classes. To others, she seemed organized, responsible. However, beneath this surface, her life was more complicated. Several years ago, Natalie had a medical procedure that tied her fallopian tubes, which prevented her from becoming pregnant naturally. Despite this, she began claiming that she was expecting another child. To support her claims, Natalie created fake medical documents, including ultrasound images, and told others that she was having a baby girl. Christian believed her and shared the news on social media, posted the ultrasound images, even organized a gender reveal party. To make her story seem more convincing, Natalie often posted pictures of herself with what looked like a growing belly or loose clothing and explained her physical appearance as a sign of her impending delivery. In reality, this was all part of a carefully orchestrated and emotionally manipulative lie, a fake pregnancy that relied on fabricated evidence. Natalie not only staged a fake situation but also created an online identity. She joined various online groups for expecting mothers, where she pretended to be a helpful member who often offered items like baby clothes, diapers, and accessories to other moms-to-be. However, there was a catch: the items could only be picked up in person at her house, and the person collecting them had to come alone. This was a deliberate strategy where her online persona was used to make contacts and choose potential targets. No one in Natalie's close circle, neither Christian nor her family, realized that her cheerful demeanor was a meticulously crafted facade. She was intent on making her story a reality, regardless of the consequences. A few weeks before her disappearance, Emily started participating more often in online groups for expecting mothers. She shared her pregnancy thoughts, sought advice, and welcomed support. In one of these forums, she was approached by a user. Her messages were friendly. She offered to donate items for Emily's future daughter, such as clothes, baby blankets, and diapers. This seemed generous, and Emily was genuinely interested. Their conversation soon turned more personal. The user came across as warm and caring, emphasizing her desire to help. When Emily suggested bringing someone with her, like her partner or sister, Natalie became uneasy. She mentioned that her street had many nosy neighbors, and she wanted to avoid attracting any attention. Although her responses were unclear, they didn't raise any major red flags. Emily talked it over with her family and initially decided against going by herself. However, she changed her mind after Natalie offered to send a driver to pick her up, saying the car would be from a ride-sharing service like Uber. On March 12, 2024, around noon, a car came to pick up Emily. However, the driver, as later discovered by investigators, was not affiliated with any ride-sharing service. It was believed that he was either a relative or a friend of Natalie. The car was an ordinary civilian vehicle. Unaware of any potential danger, Emily got in after telling her mother that she would be back soon. She thought the outing would be just a quick trip to collect some donated items before returning home. After more than an hour without any updates from Emily, her mother, Anna Paula Meridian, started to feel anxious. Soon, messages began to come from Emily's phone. However, instead of soothing her worries, the texts only increased her anxiety. Emily claimed she was fine, enjoying a pastry, and would be back soon. Yet, something felt wrong. The language used was strange, overly formal, and didn't match Emily's usual way of writing. Anna quickly realized that someone else must have sent the messages. She attempted to call Emily, but there was no response, and her voice messages went unheard. As her concern grew, the family reached out to friends and acquaintances in hopes of finding Emily. Emily's stepfather was working at the hospital that day. He sensed something was wrong. He knew Emily had intended to pick up some items, and her failure to answer calls made him even more anxious. That evening, the family quickly decided to file a missing person report. At that time, no one knew where Emily was, who the driver was, or where she was headed. The only clue the family had was an online conversation with the woman, who mentioned living in the Jardim Florianopolis neighborhood in Cuiabá. This clue marked the beginning of a search by family members and friends. Worried and desperate, they knocked on doors in the neighborhood, checked the streets, and attempted to call the number mentioned in the messages, but no one answered. Communication had completely stopped. Emily's phone was still on, but she wasn't answering. Then, Natalie suddenly changed her online behavior. She stopped replying to chat group messages and withdrew her support for others. Later, it was revealed that shortly after Emily left home, Natalie deleted all her messages and her account. This disappearance from the online world only confirmed the family's deepest fears. This was not a chance occurrence. By the evening of March 12th, the search for Emily was in full swing. Her family had reached out to the local police, shared her photos on social media, and appealed to the public for assistance. The initial hours after her disappearance were filled with urgency and anxiety, but no one anticipated how drastically the situation would develop. The following morning, March 13, 2024, a woman arrived at the emergency room of Santa Helena Hospital in Cuiabá with a newborn. She was in a wheelchair and told the hospital staff that she had given birth at home the day before. She described the labor as quick and straightforward, so she hadn't felt the need for medical help at that time. Now, she said, she was just there for a post-delivery checkup. The woman introduced herself as Natalie. That morning, the hospital staff member on duty was Emily's stepfather, a radiology technician. Although he did not know Natalie personally, he immediately sensed that something was wrong when he saw her. The previous evening, Emily had gone missing, and one of the primary theories suggested it was linked to a conversation she had with an online stranger who was offering baby items. Emily had previously mentioned to both her mother and her stepfather that she met someone online. She even shared a photo of her from the messaging app. Emily's stepfather immediately recognized the woman in the photo as the same person Emily had been talking to before she disappeared. Natalie was holding a newborn baby that the doctors believed had just been born. However, something seemed unusual. Her behavior and physical state did not align with what one would expect from someone who had recently given birth. There were no visible signs of pain, post-labor symptoms, bleeding, or trauma. Medical staff also found that she was not producing milk when she tried to breastfeed. Even the way she stood and moved raised concerns. Even though she arrived in a wheelchair, she moved around confidently and chose to sit in a chair rather than needing to. A preliminary medical evaluation raised concerns. There were no signs that she had recently given birth. Her cervix was not dilated, and her uterus was of normal size, showing no changes or discharges that usually occur after delivery. This became crucial evidence that proved her story was false. The medical staff quickly informed hospital administrators and contacted local authorities about the situation. Emily's stepfather told investigators that Emily had gone missing the day before after planning to meet a woman. When he recognized the woman in front of him matched Emily's description and photo, his concerns grew. When officers arrived at the hospital, Natalie claimed that the newborn girl was her daughter, whom she had given birth to at home. She could not provide any documentation to support her claim, saying the birth was unexpected and there was no time to go to a medical facility. She answered questions calmly and showed no signs of distress. Investigators started looking into the origin of the newborn. They ordered emergency blood tests and DNA analysis. Medical professionals confirmed that the baby had been born within the last 24 hours, which matched the timeline of Emily's disappearance. This led to a troubling question: could this child be Emily's daughter? Investigators examined Natalie's phone and found deleted conversations, including exchanges with Emily. These messages showed that Emily had agreed to meet Natalie to receive baby items. This evidence indicated a clear pattern of deception. Natalie had created a false identity, gained trust, and arranged a meeting under false pretenses. At this point, the idea that Natalie had simply gone to the hospital for a checkup was no longer believable. Law enforcement began to suspect that Natalie may have brought a baby that she did not give birth to, but rather one that was taken from someone else. Their suspicions were confirmed when they analyzed ultrasound images that Natalie had shared on social media. Investigators discovered that these images did not belong to her. They were taken from another woman's profile, a woman living in a different state, who had no known connection to Natalie. As these discrepancies emerged, the police shifted their focus to finding Emily. The infant Natalie had brought to the hospital was placed in temporary protective custody, under the care of social services, until her biological identity could be verified. Shortly after, Natalie was taken to the police station for formal questioning. At first, she remained silent. When directly asked about the child's origin, she gave vague answers, claiming that everything had been explained and that nothing wrong had occurred. Although she appeared calm and showed no signs of panic, her reluctance to provide a clear explanation led investigators to suspect that she was stalling. Only after investigators showed her the medical exam results, which disproved her claim of giving birth, along with the recovered text messages linking her to Emily, did Natalie change her story. She then shared her initial account of events. She claimed to have met Emily in online parenting groups and said that Emily was struggling in her relationship. Emily had thought about not keeping the baby. Natalie asserted that she offered to take care of the child and that Emily had agreed. However, law enforcement had doubts about this explanation. Emily's family strongly denied any claims that she intended to give up her daughter. They insisted that Emily had been excited about her baby's arrival and never showed any doubts about keeping her. The whole family actively prepared for the new baby by buying clothes, setting up a nursery, and celebrating together. Emily's mother and stepfather emphasized that she viewed her future daughter as the most important part of her life, and the thought of giving the baby away was entirely unthinkable for her. This information was part of the official case file, and Natalie's statements were now being examined for inconsistencies. When faced with increasing evidence, Natalie eventually changed her story. In a second interview with investigators, she confessed that she had tricked Emily into coming to a house by pretending to offer baby items. Emily arrived alone, as they had agreed in their online communication. Emily then began to feel pain and sat down, complaining of cramps. At that moment, Natalie approached her from behind and forcefully restrained her. After Emily lost consciousness, Natalie bound her wrists and ankles with materials she had available. She then tried to deliver the baby by making an incision in Emily's abdomen with a sharp kitchen tool. Emily received no medical assistance and ultimately died due to severe blood loss. Natalie did not express any regret in her statement. She claimed that she wanted to take care of the baby and did not mean to cause any harm. However, the way she acted, using restraints and preparing certain materials, suggested that her actions were thought out beforehand. As Natalie continued to speak, her versions of events became more inconsistent with the facts. Investigators ultimately determined that the incident was pre-planned. After questioning Natalie, law enforcement started investigating all places associated with her. One property in the Jardim Florianopolis area received special attention. This private residence, owned by Natalie's brother, was said to be where she met Emily. During the property inspection, police noticed an area behind the house where the ground looked recently disturbed. The soil was uneven. They quickly cordoned off the area and called in forensic specialists. As the specialists carefully removed the top layer of soil, they discovered that a body had been buried. Emily's body was found in a shallow grave, covered loosely with dirt and debris. The way the body was positioned indicated it had been disposed of hurriedly. Her wrists and ankles showed signs of restraints, including ropes and bits of plastic cable. Investigators later determined that the bindings were made from old internet wiring. The grave itself was poorly dug, without the use of tools, and was barely big enough to hold the body. Emily's body displayed clear signs of trauma on her body. Her face had visible injuries, including bruises, swelling, and scratches. Forensic experts noted damage to her cheekbones and nose. There were also marks on her neck that suggested she had been choked, as well as bruises on her wrists indicating she had been forcefully held down. The autopsy revealed that these injuries occurred while she was alive, implying the use of significant force. It was determined that her death resulted from severe blood loss due to a deep wound in her abdomen. The precise T-shaped incision in her lower abdomen indicated that it was not an accident. Forensic experts indicated that the shape and depth of the cut suggested the perpetrator had a basic understanding of internal anatomy and made an effort to avoid injuring the baby. This degree of knowledge is rare for someone without medical training, although it could be obtained by watching detailed instructional videos. This was further confirmed by analyzing Natalie's internet search history. A key finding was that the burial site had been prepped in advance. Initially, Natalie claimed she dug the grave after the incident, but she later changed her story, admitting it was prepared the day before the meeting. A forensic team carefully examined the scene. Using chemical tests, they discovered important traces of biological material both inside the house and throughout the property. Blood stains were present in multiple rooms. Although some parts of the floor had been cleaned, residues were still left in the tile grout and seams. These findings were meticulously recorded and included in the criminal case. Given the amount of evidence, authorities officially reclassified the case as a premeditated crime with aggravating factors. Immediately after her arrest, Natalie stated that she acted alone and that her husband, relatives, anyone else were unaware of her plans. At that time, the house was occupied by her brother and his wife. Natalie stated that her brother and his wife were not home when the crime happened, but investigators could not confirm this. Their exact whereabouts during that time remained uncertain. A significant question was whether they could genuinely be unaware of a freshly dug pit on the property or that someone had come in to help clean the house. However, it was later established that Natalie had been to the house several times leading up to the incident, under the pretense of helping with chores or spending the weekend. This made her visits seem normal and unremarkable to those living there. Forensic experts noted that it would be very challenging for a single person to dig a pit, commit an act of violence, perform a makeshift procedure, move a body, clean the crime scene, hide evidence, and leave the area without drawing attention, all within a short period. This is especially true given the logistical difficulties involved. The body was wrapped in fabric and required various materials, while the cleaning process included removing items, white blood, and washing clothing. Each of these tasks demanded time, strength, and coordination. Did Natalie truly act alone? At the time of the investigation, there were increasing suspicions, but no solid evidence was found linking anyone else to the case. No family member had been officially identified as an accomplice. Cayo Police Chief Fernando Alvarez Albuquerque said authorities are continuing to investigate whether Natalie's husband, brother, and the driver had anything to do with the death and burial. After the body was officially identified and all forensic procedures were completed, Emily's family received permission for a burial. Because of the condition of the remains, the service was conducted quickly. The ceremony was brief and did not include a traditional farewell. It was held privately, attended only by immediate family members, Emily's mother, stepfather, the young father of the baby, and a few other relatives. The family was devastated by the loss. They were deeply affected emotionally and unable to speak publicly about their grief. Emily's mother, as reported by those close to her, was in a fragile emotional state and had withdrawn from social interactions, avoiding even her neighbors. Emily's partner, who never expected to become a father under such tragic circumstances. According to the family, he has remained dedicated. He frequently visits the baby. Despite his young age, he has shown a desire to be actively involved in raising his daughter. The newborn, who was rescued after the incident, has been placed temporarily in the care of her grandmother, Emily's mother, a decision made by child welfare authorities and the district attorney's office. Emily's stepfather is also considered one of the responsible guardians. During the first few weeks, medical professionals monitored the baby's condition closely. Fortunately, she stayed in stable health. After receiving medical clearance, the baby was taken home to the same place where her mother had lived. The reason for Natalie's actions remained a key topic of conversation. Even though she was already a mother of 3, she pretended to be pregnant for almost 9 months, creating an illusion of expecting another child. She went to great lengths to forge medical records and create a believable story online, portraying herself as an expectant parent on social media. However, her goal was not just to have another baby. She specifically sought out expecting mothers who were likely to have daughters. Her method of selecting targets, arranging the setting, and researching how to remove and take baby indicated that her actions were carefully planned. Natalie is still in custody, waiting for her trial. The charges against her are still active, and investigators believe the evidence supporting these charges is strong. Emily's case has gained significant attention and raised serious concerns, influencing how online interactions are perceived, particularly among vulnerable groups. Just after midnight on a quiet July night in Melbourne, Nicholas Cameron left his apartment to take his dog for a walk, a routine he followed every night. The streets were peaceful, with city lights shimmering in the distance. However, someone was lurking in the shadows, waiting for him. Suddenly, a figure sprang out and launched a violent attack. Nick's desperate pleas for help went unanswered. As the police investigated, they uncovered a disturbing tale of control, jealousy, and betrayal, ultimately revealing an unexpected mastermind behind the attack. Nicholas Cameron, commonly known as Nick, was born on November 6, 1981, in Australia. Although the specific city is not mentioned, he grew up with his 2 siblings. His mother, Mary Cameron, divorced his father, Chris, and later married a man named Frank. Despite these family changes, Nick maintained good relationships with both his biological father and his stepfather. Through his mother's second marriage, he added 5 step-siblings to his family. Little information is available about Nick's early life, personal life, or education, but some sources suggest he worked as a landscaper. In addition to his job, he was skilled at football, though he never pursued it as a profession. However, Nick's life had complications. Reports indicate that he was also involved in distributing small amounts of methamphetamine alongside his legitimate work. In his personal life, he had a tumultuous relationship with Heidi Boss, a hairstylist who was 3 years younger. Heidi had a teenage son from a previous relationship, and his father's death in a car accident had deeply affected her. Following this loss, Heidi struggled with substance abuse, which complicated her already unstable relationship with Nick. Those who knew them described their relationship as volatile, marked by frequent highs and lows. Heidi often called Nick an ungrateful idiot, highlighting the ongoing tension between them. Although Nick could be controlling and difficult, there is no evidence of him being physically abusive. The troubles in their relationship were worsened by cheating on both sides. Nick was secretly seeing another woman named Marnie, and their relationship was serious, as Marnie was pregnant with his child. At the same time, Heidi was living a double life. She had an online persona in a private community where she interacted with others who shared her interests, all without Nick's knowledge. By early July 2021, there were no signs that their relationship was getting any better, but nothing indicated that a tragedy was on the horizon. Yet, destiny had different plans. On July 10th, just after midnight, Nick stepped out of his apartment in South Bank, Melbourne, to take his dog for a walk. As he made his way to the parking area, he was suddenly attacked by an unknown man armed with a hammer and a knife. The brutal assault lasted for 11 minutes, during which Nick was left severely injured between two parked cars. His desperate screams filled the parking lot as he pleaded for his attacker to stop. Neighbors quickly called for help, but by the time the police arrived just 6 minutes later, it was too late. Nick, 39 years old, was found covered in blood with multiple stab wounds and serious injuries from blunt force. Despite the swift response from emergency services, their attempts to save him were unsuccessful. He was pronounced dead at the scene at 12:45 a.m. The suspect tried to escape but was caught by police close to the crime scene. He was identified as 48-year-old Stuart Lindsay Heron. Heron was arrested as he attempted to leave the apartment building via elevator, with a bloody knife found on the floor next to him. He was found carrying a bloody hammer, silver handcuffs, a dog leash, a multi-tool and a lighter. During interrogation, Heron claimed he had been waiting for hours to confront Nick, a person he didn't know personally. He had supposedly seen Nick selling banned substance to minors. Initially, Heron's story suggested he was a vigilante looking out for the community. However, as investigators continued to look into the case, alarming new information emerged. The security footage from the parking lot was crucial evidence for the investigators, helping them reconstruct the events of the incident. The surveillance cameras recorded the exact moment when Stuart, holding a hammer and a sharp object, emerged from behind a pillar where he had been hiding and launched his brutal attack. As part of their investigation, officers searched Stuart's car, which was parked near the crime scene. Inside the vehicle, they discovered a notebook filled with detailed information about Nick, including the name and address of his apartment building, the times he was typically at home, and an inventory of his valuable possessions, like cash stored in 2 safes in his apartment. When police looked into Stuart's phone, they found a folder named Target that contained disturbing information about Nick's home. It had a detailed layout of Nick's apartment, photos of his dog, and even the combination to his safe. This indicated that Stuart had carefully planned the attack and might have had inside information, potentially from someone close to Nick. The situation became even more shocking when they discovered another folder on Stuart's phone called Heidi. It contained screenshots of conversations between Stuart and Nick's girlfriend, Heidi Boss. Investigators quickly realized that Stuart had been manipulated by Heidi to hurt her boyfriend. This finding altered the direction of the investigation, uncovering a much darker motive behind the attack. Authorities soon discovered that Stuart, a former fuel mechanic and owner of a towing and repair business, had met Heidi just 6 weeks before the crime. At that time, Stuart, who was somewhat of a loner, was dealing with depression following the death of his dog. He encountered Heidi on FetLife. They quickly entered into an unconventional dominant-submissive relationship, although their connection did not initially seem intimate. Stewart openly showcased his loyalty to Heidi on his profile, highlighting the many roles he took on for her, including personal servant, cook, cleaner, masseur, handyman, mechanic, even financial supporter. He expressed his strong dedication to obeying her every command and proudly called himself her lifelong subordinate. Investigators found that as their relationship grew stronger, Heidi began to share her feelings of resentment toward Nick with Stewart. She described experiencing emotional pain, saying her boyfriend made her feel worthless, insecure, and foolish. She characterized his behavior as particularly cruel and emotionally damaging. In messages obtained by the police, she called Nick a loser and expressed her desire to permanently remove him from her life. Stewart was eager to satisfy his dominant partner, Heidi, and remained loyally supportive. He assured her that he would always be there if she needed distraction, companionship, or a way to escape her situation. By June 31st, while at his apartment, Heidi suggested they confront Nick to force him to leave town for good. They came up with a plan, and Stewart confidently claimed he could persuade Nick to disappear from Heidi's life, saying he was 99.9% certain of this. Heidi then shared important information with him, including Nick's address, where he kept his apartment safe, and the location of a spare key taped to an electrical pole outside his building. Later, in statements to the police, Stewart reported that he had started closely tracking Nick's movements, both in person and online. On July 4th, he spent 7 hours observing Nick's house. He was able to enter the building but did not take any action at that time. Later, on July 9th, after a heated argument with Nick, Heidi reached out to Stewart and told him to proceed with their plan. The intention was for Stewart to ambush Nick outside his apartment to intimidate him and scare him. Heidi's role was to try to get Nick to leave his home by inviting him to visit her at 12:30 a.m., knowing that Stewart would be waiting nearby. Eventually, the situation escalated, resulting in the violent attack on Nick. Investigators later found that 2 hours after the murder, Heidi sent a text to Stewart saying she had changed her mind. Unbeknownst to her, Nick had already left his apartment after receiving her message and had been killed by the man she viewed as her possession. It was unclear whether Heidi genuinely intended to cancel the plan or was just trying to hide her involvement, a distinction the authorities needed to clarify, though it wouldn't be straightforward. Despite the substantial evidence against Stewart, he refused to testify against Heidi while in custody. Consequently, it took investigators nearly 6 weeks to gather enough evidence to arrest her. Initially, Heidi claimed she didn't know Stewart at all, but she had to acknowledge their connection when police revealed the $2,000 bank transfer linking them. During her interrogation after being arrested, Heidi tried to clarify her relationship with Stewart. She explained that their dynamic was one where she held the dominant position, and Stewart's role was to put her needs above everything else. In her view, submissives are expected to go to great lengths to make life easier for their dominant partner, even if it means violating moral and legal boundaries. This helped explain why Stewart had taken such drastic actions to satisfy her. Heidi was charged with murder due to her involvement in Nick's death. However, at her first court appearance, she requested bail, stating that she only intended for Stewart to intimidate Nick and never thought he would resort to using weapons or killing Nick. Her defense lawyer argued that the prosecution's case was weak and did not have enough evidence. In contrast, the prosecutors argued against her release, claiming that Heidi had not only conspired against Nick, even though they were in a relationship, but also shared important information about the security of his apartment building with Stewart and actively encouraged him to come outside through text messages. The prosecution believed these factors showed her significant involvement in the crime. In the end, the judge denied her request for bail, stating that he did not agree with her defense lawyer's assessment of the case as weak. By November 2022, 37-year-old Heidi pleaded guilty to manslaughter in exchange for a reduced charge. During a hearing on November 29th, her lawyer stated that although Heidi suspected Stewart had connections to outlaw motorcycle gangs, she never directly told him to kill Nick. The court was informed that in the months before the crime, Heidi's mental health had seriously declined. Her difficulties were rooted in a failed marriage and the tragic death of her ex-husband in a car accident. Following these events, she developed a worsening banned substance addiction, which intensified after she began her relationship with Nick, who was already involved in banned substance trafficking. The judge recognized that Heidi had reached a critical moment in her life when she came up with a dangerous plan with her co-defendant to intimidate Nick. He acknowledged her struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder after her husband died, and how hard she had worked to raise her son while keeping her difficulties private. Despite these factors and her promising chances for rehabilitation, the judge stated that they could not excuse her from facing the consequences for her part in the events that caused Nick's death. Heidi received a prison sentence of 6 years and 3 months, with the chance of parole after serving 3 years and 3 months. Since she had already spent 580 days in pre-trial detention, she could potentially be released in as soon as 18 months. Stewart initially pleaded not guilty to Nick's murder, and his trial was scheduled for May 2023. However, in March 2023, he changed his plea to guilty. Later, in August, he appeared at the Supreme Court of Victoria for a pre-sentencing hearing. During the trial, the prosecution highlighted the details of the case, focusing on the brutal nature of the attack. They stated that Stewart arrived near Nick's apartment building around 8:05 p.m. on July 9th, mistakenly hiding near a car he thought belonged to Nick. After realizing his mistake, he entered the level 3 parking garage through an open gate at 10:37 p.m. He then hid behind a pillar, waiting for the right moment to launch his attack. For the first time, it was revealed that Nick had suffered 14 fractures to his skull, an alarming detail that had previously been kept secret. This, along with many other injuries, illustrated the extreme violence of the assault. During the hearing, Stewart's lawyer claimed that his client had lived a normal life until meeting Heidi. It was revealed that Stewart had spoken to a psychologist, admitting that getting involved in the crime was the worst decision he ever made. The judge expressed his shock at the situation, noting that Stewart seemed to be infatuated with Heidi and hoped for a deeper connection. Lost in a fantasy involving power and submission, he inexplicably agreed to participate in this reckless plan. The judge pointed out that apart from this incident, Stewart had never committed any serious crimes, making it hard to understand how he transitioned from a law-abiding life to committing such a brutal act. This striking contrast between his previous lifestyle and his violent actions underscored the complexity of his situation and the significant influence Heidi had on him. Stewart Lindsay Heron was sentenced to 22 years in prison, with a requirement to serve at least 15 years before he could be considered for parole. The court took into account the 2 years he had already spent in pre-trial detention. As the sentence was announced, Nick's family hugged each other in the courtroom, finding some comfort in the justice delivered. Being gullible can be dangerous, sometimes even life-threatening. We all have moments when we wish to believe in miracles, feel that dreams might still be within reach. When something you've wished for seems almost attainable, it's easy to let caution and common sense slip away. Criminals often take advantage of this vulnerability. The case of Elodie Morel, a young French woman, in 2005 shocked the nation due to its brutality and inhumanity. What made it even more disturbing was the indifference shown by ordinary people who were aware of her situation but chose to remain silent for their own gain. This story reminds us that not all dreams come true and highlights the importance of being cautious about whom you trust, especially when they promise a fairy tale ending. Elodie Morel was born on 1976, in Marseille. From a young age, she had a strikingly beautiful appearance. As she grew older, Elodie developed into an even more stunning woman, with many people believing she should be on television or magazine covers. As a teenager, she dreamed of being a model, but coming from a modest background, few took her aspirations seriously. In the 1990s, Elodie submitted her photos to various modeling agencies several times but never received any replies. After finishing high school, she attended college, married a classmate named Sylvain at 22, and had a son by 25. It appeared she had abandoned her modeling dreams permanently. By 2005, Elodie worked as a sales associate at a trendy clothing store in downtown Marseille. She often received compliments and noticed people admiring or envying her looks. At 29, she maintained a perfect figure and beautiful features, easily appearing to be in her early 20s. Though Elodie never completely gave up on her modeling aspirations, she stopped discussing them, believing her time had passed. In April 2005, Elodie filled out an online application, submitted her best photos, and expressed her desire to pursue a modeling career. She soon received a reply, but what seemed like a promising opportunity from a fashion photographer turned out to be a dangerous trap. About 2 weeks after posting her profile, Elodie received an enticing offer to become the new face of the prestigious English luxury car company, Rolls-Royce. The contract promised €1,000 per day for a photo shoot, but to secure the deal, she needed to meet the photographer for a test shoot. The meeting was scheduled for May 2nd at a bar in Aigues-Mortes. Excited, Elodie shared the news with her husband, who was doubtful but didn't voice his concerns. That morning, she left her son with her parents, got into her car, and drove to the meeting location. She planned to stay in Aigues-Mortes for 3 days and had already booked a hotel room. Later that evening, Elodie called her husband to update him on her progress and mentioned she was feeling nervous. Sylvain wished her luck, told her to call him as soon as she could. This would be the last conversation he had with his wife. When Elodie arrived at the bar as planned, she sat at a table on the terrace, waiting to meet the female photographer she believed she had been emailing. However, about 10 minutes later, a man in his mid-40s approached her. He introduced himself as the photographer's assistant, explained that he was there to meet her and scout locations for the photo shoot scheduled for the next day. Since Elodie had little experience in the modeling industry, she didn't find anything suspicious about him, took him at his word. The man appeared professional, spoke confidently, and seemed knowledgeable about her prior conversations with the photographer. Their conversation flowed easily and revolved around Elodie's potential career. She began to imagine herself on the covers of popular magazines, daydreamed about how she would spend the money she would earn. Around 9 p.m., as night fell, the man proposed they look for the ideal spot for the next day's photo shoot. Aigues-Mortes, a beautiful medieval town, is filled with scenic towers, fortresses, and chapels, perfect locations for taking stunning pictures. Excited and unaware of any danger, Elodie left the bar with her new acquaintance and got into his car. Tragically, she was never seen alive again. What is particularly unsettling is that a man who knew the suspect and was aware of his malicious intentions witnessed the entire encounter. He tried to step in, but his efforts were futile. That same night, on May 2nd, a call came into the Aigues-Mortes police station. A panicked man reported that a young woman was in serious danger and that immediate action was needed. He did not know the victim's name or her location, but he was convinced time was running out. The caller was 63-year-old Dominique Tarasco, a nightclub owner who frequently provided the police with confidential information. He stated that earlier that night, he had seen his acquaintance, Guillaume Mingaud, at the bar. Guillaume had connections to the criminal underworld and was notorious for his violent behavior. The day before, he had boasted about meeting a naive, attractive girl online whom he intended to abduct and sell to a brothel in Spain for a substantial profit. Starting the search for Elodie Morel was challenging because the police had no solid leads, names, or locations. They knew that finding her quickly was crucial. By the next morning, they learned her name when her worried family reached out, reporting that she had been missing since the previous evening and that her phone was turned off. They explained that she had left for a photo shoot in another town and then disappeared. Initially, the police did not link her disappearance to the family's report. They thought she might have run away with a romantic partner. However, her family stressed that she would never leave her young son or vanish without a message. The search for Elodie did not officially start until 3 days after she went missing, which wasted valuable time. Tragically, during those 2 days, Elodie was still alive, being held captive in a house in Vergès where she suffered torture and abuse as her captors decided what to do with her. On May 5, 2005, the lead investigator in Aigues-Mortes' missing person case began to suspect that she was the endangered woman mentioned by an informant. Dominique Tarasco was called to the police station to provide a formal statement. When shown a photo of Elodie, he immediately confirmed that she was the woman he had seen 3 days earlier in a bar with Guillaume. When asked where he thought Guillaume might have taken Elodie, Dominique recalled hearing about an empty nightclub on the north side of town that had recently closed down. A police team conducted a surveillance operation at that location, and by that evening, they arrested 48-year-old Guillaume and 53-year-old Richard as they arrived at the nightclub. The exact role of Richard in this case remained unclear and needed further investigation. During a search of Guillaume, police discovered Elodie Morel's credit card in one of Guillaume's pockets, which confirmed his involvement in her disappearance. Both men were taken to the station for questioning, but Richard was released a few hours later due to insufficient evidence against him. Richard lived with his family on the outskirts of town and had a friendly relationship with Guillaume, but he had no prior legal issues. Guillaume initially claimed he didn't know Elodie and that he had just stolen her credit card. In his first account, he said that on May 2nd, while at a bar, he spotted an attractive, well-dressed woman and assumed she had money. He decided to rob her. Guillaume approached Elodie's table, gave her a compliment, and offered to buy her a coffee. Although she stated she was waiting for someone, she didn't tell him to leave. They engaged in a brief conversation, during which he managed to take her credit card from her purse that was hanging on her chair, leaving before she realized it was gone. Guillaume insisted that the entire incident was spontaneous. He claimed he only stole her card and had no involvement in her disappearance. Investigators found that he used the stolen card the same day to withdraw cash from an ATM located on the outskirts of town. However, he could not explain how he knew the PIN, which made his story seem unreliable. Additionally, a background check revealed that Guillaume had a criminal history with multiple convictions, including armed robbery, banned substance trafficking, and a 9-year prison sentence for a violent abuse. Despite being released from prison, Guillaume had not changed his behavior. Instead, he had become more cautious to avoid returning to jail. The situation worsened for Guillaume when police discovered Elodie's phone number in his phone, along with their email exchanges regarding a photo shoot. This evidence contradicted his initial account and forced him to change his story. He admitted that he found Elodie's modeling profile online and began messaging her while pretending to be a photographer. Elodie, being trusting and eager, quickly agreed to meet him without much skepticism. Guillaume had been using a female alias to communicate with her, which made him nervous that she might become suspicious when a man showed up instead of the expected photographer. Nevertheless, Elodie saw nothing unusual and willingly went with him late at night to check out possible locations for the photo shoot, even getting into his car without hesitation, a fact later confirmed by witnesses. After driving to a remote location, Guillaume left the main road and stopped the car. He pulled out a gun and demanded that Elodie give him her credit card. When she refused, he took her purse and found the card himself. He then insisted on getting the PIN, but Elodie still wouldn't provide it. Angered, he slammed her head against the dashboard, choked her until she finally gave in and revealed the code. After that, he locked Elodie in the trunk and went to the nearest ATM to check if she was telling the truth. The PIN worked, and he emptied her account. With the money in his possession, he started thinking about what to do next with the woman locked in his trunk. Feeling the need for time to figure things out, Guillaume drove to his friend Richard's house to hide Elodie for a while. He told Richard about the woman in his trunk, mentioned that he planned to sell her for a significant profit, which he was willing to share with Richard. It's worth noting that Richard and his wife once worked at the same nightclub. He is a security guard and she is a cleaner. After the nightclub closed, they both lost their jobs and were struggling to get by, leading Richard to begin drinking heavily. Richard agreed to help Guillaume by giving him the keys to his empty garage, suggesting it as a place to keep the woman. He wanted to avoid any direct interaction with her and preferred to let Guillaume handle things, hoping to receive a share of the money. Later investigations found that Elodie had been held captive for more than 2 days, during which she suffered severe torture, assault, beatings, and severe hunger and thirst. Guillaume reported that he and Elodie spent a lot of time talking about their children, who were of similar ages. Elodie pleaded for her release, arguing that her son needed her. Guillaume admitted that he felt some sympathy for her and briefly considered letting her go. He even brought her a bottle of water because the garage was extremely hot and she had been there for 2 days. However, on the night of May 4th, everything changed when Richard, heavily intoxicated, decided to confront Elodie. Guillaume claimed that while he was away, Richard entered the garage and strangled Elodie with a rope. Guillaume maintained that he did not take part in the actual murder and only helped to hide her body. However, he would not disclose the location of her remains. During the police search of the Ligonier residence, they seemed nervous but not particularly shocked. They allowed the officers to enter without resistance and continued eating at the kitchen table, showing little concern for the search. The police discovered several items belonging to Elodie in their teenage daughter's room, such as her cell phone, jewelry, a hair clip, and a wristwatch. Additionally, Elodie's purse and wallet were found with Richard's wife. Other items, including torn pieces of the victim's clothing, were found in the trash bin outside the house. More alarming evidence was revealed in Richard's garage. Investigators found dried brown stains that looked like blood, along with crumpled tissues, cigarette butts, an empty plastic bottle, and a piece of rope. Both Richard and his wife, Francine, were arrested, while their 14-year-old daughter was temporarily placed with relatives. When asked how Elodie's belongings came to be in their home, they explained that Guillaume had brought them in exchange for using their garage. They acknowledged knowing that he was holding a woman there but chose not to intervene because he had promised to reward them. They also admitted to giving him a bottle of water and a piece of rope when he asked, without questioning his motives. Forensic evidence showed that the brown stains on the garage floor were Elodie's blood. Additionally, DNA found on crumpled tissues matched Guillaume's. Saliva found on cigarette butts belonged to both Elodie and Guillaume. Elodie's family asserted that she had never smoked due to her asthma, which caused her to have severe coughing and choking fits when exposed to cigarette smoke. The chilling reality emerged. Guillaume had kept Elodie in the garage for 2 days, repeatedly assaulting and likely torturing her, forcing her to smoke as part of his abuse. Guillaume changed his story after the investigators revealed the forensic evidence. He admitted that he and Elodie had been intimate in the garage, but insisted it was consensual. He claimed they had smoked together and talked a lot before he decided to let her go. However, he still maintained that Richard Ligonier had killed her while he was away, supposedly because Richard feared Elodie might go to the police after he released her. This explanation raised many inconsistencies, the most significant being that Richard had no motive to kill Elodie. First, he had never met her, and she had never seen him or any of his family members. Second, Elodie had been brought to the garage in the trunk of a car, meaning she wouldn't have known where she was and couldn't lead the police there. Lastly, Richard was just an ordinary drunk, unable to physically harm anyone. He was satisfied with receiving payment in the form of Elodie's belongings and a promise of money from his friend once the situation was resolved. Earlier, investigators discovered an empty plastic water bottle in the garage. Guillaume claimed he felt sorry for Elodie and brought her water, but tests revealed that the liquid contained high levels of potent drugs. After consuming these drugs, Elodie would have likely been unconscious or barely aware, giving Guillaume the opportunity to do as he pleased. When questioned about why he drugged her, Guillaume changed his story again. He now said he was prepared to set her free and that they had agreed she wouldn't go to the police. He claimed Elodie wanted to return home to her family and forget the incident, as if it were just a bad dream. However, he asserted that she attempted to escape, which resulted in a struggle during which he hit her, explaining the blood stains found on the garage floor. He then locked her inside and left. Guillaume stated he drugged Elodie to calm her and prevent her from trying to escape again. He crushed some pills, dissolved them in water, and then departed, returning 12 hours later. By that time, Elodie was severely dehydrated. She quickly drank the water without noticing its odd taste and passed out within minutes. Guillaume claimed she accidentally overdosed because her weakened body couldn't handle the drugs. Realizing she had stopped breathing, he put her body in the trunk of her car, which he had left in a parking lot near the bar where they first met. Later, he drove the car to Richard's property using the keys he had taken from her. Although Guillaume refused to disclose where he took the car with Elodie's body, his account had numerous inconsistencies. Notably, a rope found in the garage contained sweat and skin cells from both Elodie and Guillaume, suggesting he likely strangled her. All the evidence was stacked against him, and he was aware of it. To reduce his sentence, Guillaume struck a deal with investigators, confessing that he had left the car near the old cemetery in Aigues-Mortes. The police found the vehicle on May 6, exactly where he indicated. It had been exposed to the sun for 3 days, and the body in the trunk was already decomposing. The autopsy revealed clear signs of torture, beatings, and strangulation. The victim had been tied up, drugged, assaulted, and ultimately strangled to death with a rope. The trial for the 3 individuals involved in the crime began in February 2008, nearly 3 years after the shocking events. Guillaume Mingaud was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. Richard Lignier and his wife attempted to persuade the jury that they had no knowledge of the captive in their garage. They claimed they had merely let an old friend stay with them for a few days without asking questions. However, the discovery of the victims' belongings in their home contradicted their story. Ligniers was charged with aiding and abetting. In 2010, each received a 6-year prison sentence. Guillaume and his lawyer appealed the court's decision, attempting to place some of the blame for the crime on the Lignier. This was their only chance to lessen his life sentence and reduce the minimum time he would have to serve. On May 3, 2010, exactly 5 years after Elodie Morel's murder, the new trial began. During the proceedings, it was revealed that Richard and Francine were aware of Elodie's captivity and the serious danger she faced, yet they took no action. Not only did they keep her belongings and give some to their daughter, but they also supplied Guillaume with everything he requested, such as rope and water, without questioning his motives or considering the consequences. Ultimately, the court reduced Guillaume Mingaud's life sentence to 30 years, requiring him to serve 2/3 of that time before he could be eligible for parole. Richard and Francine Lignier, due to their complicity and inaction, were each sentenced to 8 years in prison with no chance for early release. The tragic case of Elodie Morel serves as a harrowing reminder of the perils of unchecked trust and the devastating consequences of bystander indifference. Her dream of a modeling career, pursued with Rosa with hope, was cruelly exploited by Guillaume Mingaud, whose deceit led to her brutal torture and murder. Equally disturbing is the complicity of Richard and Francine Lignier, who prioritized personal gain over human life, allowing Elodie's suffering to continue in their garage. This case underscores the critical need for vigilance in the face of enticing promises and the moral imperative to act against injustice. Elodie's story, etched into France's collective memory, calls us to honor her by fostering skepticism, compassion, and courage to prevent such tragedies from recurring. The Lundy family lived a quiet life in Palmerston North, New Zealand, a cozy town with a pleasant atmosphere. The spouses' names were Mark Edward Lundy and Christine Marie Lundy. At this time, they had been married for 17 years. They almost never quarreled and had one child, a daughter named Amber. She was cheerful, sociable, and becoming a model student in her elementary school. Amber was also a member of the Scouts. The Lundy family owned a business, which Mark ran as the public face of the company, while Christine took on a significant portion of the administrative work. However, they chose a narrowly specialized activity that was not very popular. As a result, the business did not develop as they had hoped. Despite their stubborn efforts to invest and grow the business, they incurred losses, which ultimately left them with about $100,000 in debt. As their business prospects seemed bleak, Mark decided to seek alternative sources of income. In 1999, he purchased 2 plots of land in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, about a 2-hour drive from their family home, where he planned to invest in a winery and grape growing. He hoped this new venture would support him, but unfortunately, that did not materialize. He missed payments for the land, and due to late fees, the new business quickly began to incur even greater losses. Mark missed several payment deadlines, resulting in interest penalties of approximately 14%. At the time of the murder, the Lundy family owed $140,000 in interest penalties. The final deadline was August 30, 2000, the day his wife and daughter were found dead. On the morning of August 29, 2000, Mark went to Pet 1, near Wellington, about 150 km from Palmerston North, to address some business-related matters and to sell a couple of kitchen sinks, which was a common task for him. Around 5 p.m. that same day, he checked into a motel in Pet 1. Half an hour later, he called Christine, and they spoke for 8 minutes. She shared her plans of taking Amber out to dinner at McDonald's. After their conversation, she made another call to a friend and then left with Amber for dinner. Later, a receipt from the cafe was found at their home, but there was no further news from Christine. The next morning, Mark went to more meetings. He called Christine again, but she did not answer. After waiting some time and trying twice more, he found it strange that she was not responding. Normally, she would answer right away. Concerned, Mark decided to reach out to Christine's friend, but she seemed rushed and unable to help. At around 9 a.m., Glenn Wedgery, Christine's brother, went to Lundy's house to see Christine about his GST return. A horrifying scene unfolded before his eyes as he entered the house. He saw both Christine and Amber in tragic situations. Immediately, Glenn notified the police and Mark. Upon arriving in Palmerston North, Mark found that the road to their house was blocked by police. He was detained and told he needed to go with them to the station because his wife and daughter were deceased. Overwhelmed with grief, Mark could not believe what they were telling him and was visibly distraught. The officers decided that the news was too much for him, so they took him to the station in a patrol car. Once at the station, Glenn was already there. Glenn owned a small business and occasionally sought help from Christine with administrative issues. On the morning of August 30th, he first called Christine to confirm whether she was busy, but she did not answer. Knowing that his sister was responsible and unlikely to cancel a planned meeting at the last minute, he decided to go to her house. Rarely using the main entrance, and out of habit as a close relative, he entered through the back door. To his surprise, Glenn found that the back door was wide open and it was suspiciously quiet inside. At first, he decided not to attach any importance to it. He walked inside and greeted the family, but no one answered. When Glenn walked around the house, he understood why he was being ignored. First, Glenn found Amber. More precisely, he thought it was Amber, because given the state of the body, it was difficult to identify the girl. She showed no signs of life. He checked her pulse and confirmed that she was dead. Glenn noticed how badly her head was disfigured. It looked like a bloody mess. Then, he found his sister lying naked in bed. Her head and face were also badly disfigured. Glenn immediately called the police. While waiting for law enforcement, he remained in the house, sitting at the kitchen table, not understanding what could have happened to his loved ones. When the police and paramedics arrived on the scene, they immediately assessed the scale of the attacker's cruelty. The scene showed that both Christine and Amber had been attacked with such fury that parts of their brain and skull fragments were found on the floor and walls. A large piece of brain matter was even found on the ceiling in Christine's bedroom. Judging by the position of the bodies, it seemed Christine had tried to escape, but the attacker caught up with her in the hallway and beat her to death with blows to the head from a heavy object. The house was carefully examined, and it turned out that only Christine's jewelry box was missing. The police had no clues. Forensic experts were only able to find a broken latch on one of the windows, suggesting the thief probably entered through it. Additionally, there was a small blood stain here, which seemed too far from the scene of the attack and was likely left by the criminal. Despite the fact that some valuables were missing, this crime did not appear to be related to robbery and seemed more personal in nature, given the severity of the attack. Mark was obviously traumatized by the news of his family's death. Even when he was brought to the police station, he still could not formulate his thoughts coherently. However, after a while, he calmed down and was able to communicate with law enforcement officers. He described in detail the last day of his trip on the eve of the massacre. He had a reliable alibi since he was in another city engaged in selling kitchen sinks, which was confirmed by numerous witnesses. Mark described his nearly two-decade marriage as a sincere and loving relationship, but admitted that he had not had intimacy with his wife for quite some time, which seemed like a serious contradiction. Mark was reluctant to go into intimate details about his marriage, as if he were hiding something. Nevertheless, during questioning, he admitted that to compensate for the lack of an intimate life, he periodically used escort services. While Mark was at the motel, he read a book, drank half a bottle of rum, called a business partner at 8:28 p.m., and then at 11:30 p.m. contacted an escort agency and used the services of a call girl. He left the motel early in the morning and went on business, and by 8 a.m., he was already selling sinks. Mark's first client also told the police that he had tried to contact his wife several times that morning, but she had ignored his calls. After Mark's interrogation, the police were almost certain that he was innocent. At least, he did not raise any suspicions. The only questionable point in his story was his regular infidelity, which he had tried to hide during the early stages of the interrogation. As a result, his behavior was attributed to guilt over his infidelity. Mark was released, but they did not remove him from the list of suspects, as further checks of many facts were necessary since husbands are often responsible for such crimes. Law enforcement agencies briefly mentioned that Christine and Amber had died from multiple blows to the head from a heavy object, something like a weapon or small axe. However, nothing like this could be found at the scene of the massacre. A later forensic examination allowed investigators to find remnants of Fleck brand paint in the victim's hair, and its color was identical to that which Mark used to mark his own tools in case he lent them to someone. After comparing these facts, the police began searching for something like an axe that could be on the list of Mark's tools. Mark confirmed that there should be an axe in the garage, but it was not found during the search. The tool had disappeared. The most suitable place to dispose of the weapon was a river flowing near the crime scene. Several groups of divers combed the bottom but found nothing. Despite this, the detectives were sure that Mark was not involved in the murder and that the criminal had simply used his axe. However, this belief was not universally shared. At the funeral of his wife and daughter, Mark was heartbroken. He cried during the entire service, could not even get up when everyone else did. He had to be escorted to the car because he could not walk normally. Many thought that Mark was simply overacting, trying to hide his guilt and confuse everyone. While Mark's family supported him in every way and confirmed that it was very difficult for him. However, the rumors proved impossible to stop. Everywhere Mark went, people looked for some kind of catch and tried to find a way to incriminate him. It got so bad that the police even had to hold another press conference at which law enforcement officers confirmed that Mark was essentially another victim in this situation, just like the deceased, so he was not considered a suspect in the murder. At the same time, forensic experts continued to collect information, and inconsistencies began to emerge. It turned out that a few hours before the murder and for several hours afterward, Mark's phone was disabled. This was contrary to the usual activity of a man who often received calls. Then a woman came to the police station, introducing herself as a neighbor of the Lundy family, Margaret Dance. The witness reported that on the night of that fateful day, she went to a choir rehearsal at about 7:15 p.m. As she was leaving, she saw a stout man running down the street, dressed in overalls, with light curly hair that looked like a wig. It seemed that it was a man trying to disguise himself as a woman. When the stranger ran past her, she recognized Mark. He ran by without saying a word or turning around. Margaret was sure that it was Mark, who should not have been in the area because of his absence, and all of this seemed suspicious. Following this statement, the police officers decided to check on Mark again. This time, they obtained a warrant to search his car, exposing the interior thoroughly. Mark admitted that he had driven it on the night of the 30th. Having analyzed the clothing found, forensic experts discovered two stains resembling blood, a large drop that belonged to Mark and a smaller one that belonged to Christine. However, the second stain was very small. Given the brutal nature of the massacre, the criminal should have stained much more, considering that the walls and even the ceiling were splattered with blood. Forensic experts suggested that the trace could have appeared on Mark's shirt before. Perhaps Christine accidentally cut herself while cooking and stained her husband's shirt. The other blood stain belonged to Mark and was much larger. In its center, forensic scientists found a small mucus substance the size of a grain of rice. They assumed that the owner of the shirt might have blown his nose into it but decided to conduct a more thorough analysis. For this, they invited an expert who used a new testing technique called immunohistochemistry. Based on the results, the specialist concluded that the mucus substance was indeed a piece of Christine's brain, which could not have ended up on Mark's shirt. Investigators suggested that these particles got onto the shirt via the jumpsuit, which had most of the bloodstains, that Mark simply disposed of the clothes by throwing them into a garbage container far from his home. It seemed probable that Mark was indeed near the crime scene at the time of the murder. After checking the chronology of events, detectives realized there was a 3-hour window for which Mark had no confirmed alibi. To accurately determine the time of death of the victims, additional tests were required. The forensic expert examined the contents of the stomach of the deceased, concluded that the time of death for Christine and Amber coincided with the 3-hour window that Mark needed to account for. To prove that he could have made such a long trip, the police obtained a receipt for Mark's gasoline purchase, then compared the amount of gasoline he used that day, questioned him in detail, and calculated the approximate mileage. However, it turned out that he consumed much more gasoline than was required for the trip to and from the city, about twice as much. All this did not fit into the overall picture and raised even more suspicions against Christine's husband. Now, detectives began to take Mark seriously as the main suspect in the double murder. According to investigators, after the massacre, he broke the window latch and stole a jewelry box. He also undressed his wife to confuse the investigation with contradictory details. Then, he disposed of the murder weapon, overalls, and the blonde wig he had been wearing that morning. After that, he went to a neighboring town to sell the stolen items while maintaining the illusion that the situation was normal. He even created a fuss and called his friend, asking her to check what had happened to Christine. In turn, Mark continued to insist on his innocence. The investigators lacked direct evidence: a jumpsuit, a wig, a jewelry box, and an axe. All of these were missing, making it impossible to take fingerprints. The detectives decided to verify their conclusions by independently driving the route that the alleged criminal should have taken in 3 hours. With great difficulty and constant speeding, they managed to approximate the time gap theoretically. Given a sufficient reserve of time and not wasting it, Mark could have dealt with his family. It was surprising how he managed to avoid being stopped for constant speeding on the way in both directions. The motive for the crime was still in question. After all, the Lundy spouses seemed to be a loving couple, making it hard to believe that Mark was capable of killing his wife and daughter. The detectives decided to investigate issues in the family's financial situation. As it turned out, on August 28, the day before the murder, Mark received a notice that he urgently needed to make a payment for vineyard land, or he could lose it. He had only 5 days to do so, and the penalty for failing to comply was significant: $140,000, a sum the family did not have. On the same day, Mark suggested to Christine that they increase the amount of her life insurance policies from $200,000 to $500,000. They followed through, although there was naturally no reasonable justification for such additional expenses. A day later, someone dealt with Christine and child. All this seemed even more premeditated given the timing. When his wife and daughter died, the new policy had not yet taken effect. In fact, even if his bloody plan succeeded, Mark would not have received the expected payout. After Christine's death, however, the insurance company paid $75,000 toward the mortgage, but Mark never saw it. In February 2001, Mark, whom law enforcement initially supported, was arrested for the murders of Christine and Amber. He was denied bail and awaited the start of the hearing behind bars. The trial was scheduled for 2002. The prosecution claimed that he killed his wife and daughter for the insurance money, with his primary target being his wife. Amber became an accidental victim. He did not intend to harm her, but when the girl witnessed the murder, he was forced to take action. The jury heard the entire list of arguments and evidence against Mark. Unfortunately, the prosecutor's office lacked the murder weapon, but they believed that the evidence of his guilt was already sufficient to convince the jury. Mark, contesting the prosecution's claims, had his defense attorney argue that a loving husband would never harm his family. The lawyer pointed out apparent gaps and inconsistencies in the prosecution's tactics. After considering both sides, the jury deliberated for 7 hours. Mark was found guilty of double murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 17 years. However, the fight for his freedom was just beginning. Only the lawyers and Mark were dissatisfied with the verdict. They promptly began the appeals process, but 4 months later, the appeal was rejected and the minimum time for parole was increased to 20 years. Interestingly, at this point, Mark's support grew even more, contrasting with his initial situation after the tragic death of his family. The prosecution provided a highly questionable timeline that seemed far-fetched. In light of this, those who previously considered Mark a killer began to shift their stance. The 3-hour time frame in which the crime occurred appeared implausible, given the journey and the disposal of evidence involved. Even with a high speed of about 120 kilometers per hour, the police could only travel from city to city in approximately 1 hour and 33 minutes. It would have taken even more time to deal with 2 victims and dispose of the murder weapon, in addition to returning. All of this seemed unrealistic. To dispute the allegations, even a drop of brain matter found on Mark's shirt was scrutinized, as the method of analysis used was deemed too inaccurate. 7 years after the trial, an article was published about the tragic massacre of the Lundy family, detailing arguments that were previously unknown to the public. It meticulously refuted all the prosecution's claims, even questioning the words of the neighbor, Margaret. Some inconsistencies, including the time frames she provided, did not match the prosecution's narrative. At the trial, she indicated that the murders were committed the evening before a scheduled visit, claiming to have seen a man at about 7:15 p.m. She stated that at that moment there were 7 people standing near the takeaway food shops who should also have seen Mark in disguise. However, none of them saw him running around the area in a wig. The prosecutor insisted that Mark had changed the time on his computer and had cleaned the system, but later, upon inspection, it was discovered that the hard drive had, in fact, been infected with a virus that was randomly corrupting files. Mark simply didn't know about it yet. At that point, even a reanalysis of the paint found in Amber's hair failed to find a match with the substance that Mark had used to clean his tools. The defense insisted that the police had focused on Mark from the very beginning. All attempts to acquit him from the start were more likely made to divert attention, a way to gain trust. The authorities had several other suspects who did not even have an alibi, but they were simply ignored. Soon after the article was published, Mark's defenders filed another appeal and turned to the highest judicial instance in New Zealand. This became the last chance to acquit Mark. The preliminary hearings took place in 2013, and the lawyers prepared a strong case that provided answers to all the controversial allegations of the prosecution. Thanks to this, everyone began to seriously doubt Mark's guilt. His defenders even secured his family's bail after 18 months pending trial, and this has been ongoing for 12 years. The hearings began in the spring of 2015, and interestingly, the prosecution radically changed its tactics. The prosecutor's office completely reworked the timeline, claiming that Mark committed the murder at night after returning home from a visit with a call girl, giving him enough time to get home, have breakfast in a cafe in another city, and continue his business trips. According to eyewitnesses, he behaved quite calmly and was in a good mood. Some of the controversial arguments were discarded, while others were reworked to better fit the situation. The prosecution clearly did not intend to give up. Even new witnesses appeared. For example, a cleaner who went to Lundy House on the 28th said that she sensed a lot of tension between the spouses. The defense also intended to present compelling arguments. New technologies now allowed for a different approach to assessing evidence. DNA samples from 2 unidentified men were found under the fingernails of Christine, which did not match the materials belonging to Mark. Additionally, it was discovered that during the initial investigation, the police had ignored several compelling pieces of evidence. For example, dark hair found in Christine's hand clearly did not belong to her. 10 hairs were found under the right fingernail and 11 under the left. The hairs were sent to the ESR for testing in 2 plastic bags. The bags remained untouched at the ESR for 9 months and were then returned to the police in June 2001. After his conviction in 2002, Mark wrote to the police asking that all material relating to his case be preserved. The police ignored this request and destroyed the hairs in December 2003. Detective Inspector Mark Hercock, the lead investigator at the 2015 retrial, confirmed that the hairs had never been examined or tested. The lawyer provided a new theory, suggesting that the killer could have been Glenn, Christine's brother, the very person who discovered the bodies and waited in the kitchen for the police to arrive. He had explained the scratch on his nose as a mark from a domestic cat, which led the police to leave him alone. At that time, however, the police had searched Christine's brother's house and car. They used luminol and found blood stains in both, but did not investigate further, which could have belonged to the murdered women. Glenn's neighbor admitted that he had long suspected Glenn of the murder because he had witnessed Glenn trying to dispose of some clothes. During the hearings, the prosecution claiming that Christine's brother had unhealthy tendencies and had molested Christine, leading to the deaths when she discovered it. Naturally, by this point, the defense had lost significant arguments to support these theories, as a lot of time had passed and traces were no longer available. Another strong point for the defense involved communication with an expert who identified the brand on the shirt. According to him, he had worked in a laboratory not intended for this kind of analysis. The technique was completely new and untested, and he likely made mistakes. The defense argued that the stains on the shirt could have originated from a meat pie. New studies were conducted with the best specialists, but they all concluded that the sample was poorly preserved and unsuitable for analysis. The only thing they could confirm was that the stain was from human tissue, but its origin was unknown, hence, this evidence was excluded as unreliable. Margaret was also not invited to the courtroom, and her testimony was disregarded. The defense presented a new theory regarding what could have happened to Christine and Amber. They argued that shortly before the murders, the family began receiving threats regarding debts, suggesting that someone came to the Lundy house to intimidate Mark into paying them off more quickly. This argument sounded quite convincing, but the prosecution insisted that only Mark had a substantial motive to get rid of his loved ones due to mounting financial problems and fear of being exposed by his wife as a bankrupt. The increase in the life insurance policy right before the murders seemed suspicious to the prosecutor and could not be considered coincidental. The jury deliberated for more than 15 hours. After these hearings, many jurors hesitated and could not reach a consensus. The Supreme Court upholding the previous verdict, Mark was sent back to jail to serve the remaining 8 years of his 20-year sentence before he could apply for parole. However, the defense did not give up and attempted to file an appeal in 2017, which became possible after changes in legislation. They focused on the obvious errors in the investigation and inconsistencies in the prosecution's version, but the court confirmed the sentence once more. The Court of Appeal ruled that the mRNA evidence was new science that had never been used before or since and should not have been presented to the jury, but upheld Mark's conviction. This was the interim provision, the mechanism that allowed the Court of Appeal to dismiss Mark's appeal. Mark's lawyer, Jonathan Eaton QC, then argued in the High Court that Mark had been the victim of junk science, and in May 2019 he was granted leave to appeal to the High Court, based solely on the interim provision argument. On December 20, 2019, the New Zealand High Court dismissed Mark's appeal, stating in its closing that other evidence demonstrates beyond reasonable doubt that Mr. Mark murdered Christine and Amber Lundy. Mark remained unable to fight for his freedom until 2022 when, in August, he was given the right to apply for parole. He was hopeful for release, but the commission refused, citing that he did not provide a plan to address his aggression issues. He maintained that he had not killed anyone and had no anger management problems, making it impossible for him to create such a plan. Despite the denial, a retrial of the appeal took place in May 2003. This time, the counsel sought to understand what motivated him regarding his family. Mark again insisted on his innocence, stating he would rather die in prison than admit to something he didn't do. This only worsened his situation, as he was denied release and required to undergo rehabilitation for alcohol issues he had faced before his imprisonment. Mark's relatives supported him, understanding he could not confess to a murder he did not commit, as this would destroy his struggle for freedom that had lasted for 2 decades. However, he remains hopeful of ever being released and continues to insist on his innocence. In 2025, North and South journalist Mike White revealed that other forensic evidence, such as hair samples from Christine's fingernails, had never been tested. A scientist had found blood-soaked fibers on a window next to the door where police believed the perpetrator had entered the Lundys' home. Police had also sent these fibers to the Institute of Environmental Science and Research, but again, they had never been tested. Police could not explain why the fibers had never been tested. After another hearing in April 2025, Mark was pardoned after serving 23 years in prison. He is scheduled to be released in May. He will face a variety of restrictions, including a ban on online dating, social media, and media interviews. He will be required to notify his probation office of any relationships or employment. The tragic case of the Lundy family remains one of New Zealand's most controversial and polarizing criminal cases. After over 2 decades of legal battles, Mark Lundy's pardon in April 2025, following 23 years of imprisonment, marked a significant turning point. The untested forensic evidence, such as the hair samples and blood-soaked fibers, raised serious questions about the integrity of the original investigation and the reliability of the evidence used to convict him. While some continue to believe in Mark's guilt, citing the financial motive and the timing of the insurance policy increase, others argue that the prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence and flawed science, leaving room for reasonable doubt. Mark's release, accompanied by strict probation conditions, reflects the ongoing tension between justice and uncertainty in this case. As he steps into a new chapter of his life, the unresolved questions surrounding the deaths of Christine and Amber Lundy continue to haunt those seeking the truth.